The Jacobson family seemed to have it all: wealth, success, and a beautiful home in Wellington, Florida. They appeared to be the ideal loving family. However, appearances can be misleading. Behind the facade of their perfect life lay a much darker reality. What was meant to be a joyful birthday celebration for their two young boys turned into a devastating event, leading to a tragedy so profound that the entire nation would remember their names. To fully grasp this story, we need to go back to 1989 when Neil Jacobson met Frankie at a gym in Bayside, Queens, New York, where they both lived and worked. They are ambitious and successful in their careers. Frankie was making her mark at Lehman Brothers, a leading firm in finance, while Neil had established his own boutique firm on Long Island. They were young, driven, and aspiring to achieve the American dream. Those who knew them praised their relationship as one filled with deep admiration and affection. Frankie was entirely devoted to Neil. In turn, he was seen as a charismatic and kind man with immense potential. Within his family and social circles, he was often regarded as a golden boy, intelligent, charming, and seemingly unstoppable. Together, Neil and Frankie appeared to be the perfect couple. They soon took the next step in their relationship by getting married and moving into Neil's home in New Jersey. Transitioning into married life was easy for them. Together, they created a comfortable, rewarding life filled with shared interests and adventures. They did everything, enjoying activities like biking, scuba diving, and weekend trips to the countryside, which helped strengthen their bond. To an outside observer, their life seemed perfect. However, amidst their seemingly ideal marriage, they felt something was missing: children. They desperately wanted to start a family, but the path to parenthood was challenging. For years, they endured the painful reality of infertility, going through multiple fertility treatments that brought both hope and disappointment. Despite the emotional toll, they remained determined. Finally, in 2003, after many struggles, their dreams came true when they welcomed twin boys, Joshua and Eric. With their lives already comfortable, Frankie and Neil experienced happiness beyond what they had ever imagined. Their family felt complete, and they thrived both personally and professionally. Neil's parents, Harold and Goldie Jacobson, moved from New Jersey to Florida in 2000. Although they loved their new home, they missed being close to their son and his family. They often expressed their frustration about the distance and wished for more time with their grandchildren. In 2005, Harold was diagnosed with cancer, and his health deteriorated rapidly, making it impossible for him to travel to New Jersey. This situation was a turning point for Neil. Being far from his father during such a critical time was too much to bear. He decided to move his family to Florida to be closer to his parents. Before the move, Neil had already started investing in real estate in Florida. He bought a pre-construction condo in Lantana and then a second one shortly after. Real estate quickly became an obsession for him, leading to the purchase of a third condo. Despite recognizing that he was stretching himself financially, he was drawn in by the booming market. Frankie, however, was concerned about his investments and questioned their practicality. Nonetheless, Neil was resolute in his decision and was not willing to change his plans. With his properties piling up in Florida, Neil began pushing Frankie to relocate. She was resistant, hesitant to leave behind the life they had built in New Jersey. She loved their home, their community, and the stability they had created. But as time passed, the financial strain of maintaining their New Jersey home became overwhelming. Eventually, Frankie reluctantly agreed to the move. The Jacobsons officially settled in Florida, eager to start a new chapter close to family. However, things did not go as planned. Neil had hoped to sell their New Jersey home before the move, but the market wasn't in his favor. Just 2 months after they arrived in Florida, tragedy struck. Harold Jacobson passed away. The loss of his father devastated Neil in ways he hadn't expected. He had uprooted his entire life to be closer to Harold, only to lose him so soon after arriving. The grief weighed heavily on him, and his mother, Goldie, later revealed that Neil had struggled with his mental health from a young age. She recalled that as a teenager, he had been diagnosed with obsessive-compulsive disorder, an issue that had plagued him for years. Doctors had noted that Neil had an overwhelming desire to be the perfect child, a pressure that followed him into adulthood. As the years passed, his struggles with anxiety only grew, and soon, things took an even darker turn. The Great Recession hit Florida hard, and Neil, who worked as a mortgage broker. The real estate market collapsed, and the once thriving business that had allowed him to invest so freely was now crumbling beneath him. The financial security he had worked so hard to build was slipping away. As the weight of his losses grew heavier, so did the cracks in his once stable world. The Florida condos he had invested in before relocating were quickly turning into a financial nightmare. Burdened with subprime mortgages, their payments increased month after month, stretching his resources thin. At first, Neil had convinced himself that things would turn around. He had always been a problem solver, always finding ways to make things work. But this time, no amount of determination could keep the walls from closing in. With little to no work coming in, and 4 separate mortgages draining their finances. At first, Neil and Frankie tried to hold on, dipping into their savings to stay afloat. But as time passed, their financial situation only worsened. Bills piled up, debt collectors began calling, and the stress of trying to keep everything together was pushing Neil to his limits. Desperate for a solution, he started making risky financial decisions, one bad choice after another, each one digging them deeper into a hole. He chased after risky investments, sought out loans, all in a futile attempt to stop the inevitable collapse. Eventually, the weight of it all became too much to bear. The financial juggling act had run its course. Frankie was exhausted and drained, made the painful decision to stop paying the mortgages on their 3 Florida condos. It was a move that felt like surrender, but they had no choice. There was simply no more money left to give. By the year 2008, the pressure of Neil's business failures had begun to take a serious toll on his health. At first, it started with minor complaints, aches and pains that he couldn't quite explain, but as time went on, his symptoms worsened. He became sluggish, struggling to muster the energy for even the most basic tasks. His body felt heavy, and his mind clouded. He experienced random bouts of dizziness that left him feeling unstable, and he found himself unable to focus the way he used to. Concerned, he visited the family doctor, who ordered a blood test. In October, the results were troubling. Neil had elevated hormone levels, but there was no immediate explanation for his decline. As the weeks passed, his condition only worsened. The once energetic and determined man was now lethargic, withdrawn, barely functioning. He was eventually diagnosed with depression and transient peripheral vertigo, a condition that further contributed to his constant dizziness. In an attempt to help him cope, his doctor prescribed Zoloft, a common antidepressant. Neil, desperate to feel better, took the medication as prescribed, hoping it would offer some relief. But instead of improving, his mental state deteriorated further. A few days after starting Zoloft, he was called back to the doctor's office, where they added a prescription for Xanax. It was meant to ease his anxiety, but his family and friends quickly noticed that something wasn't right. Instead of stabilizing his mood, the medication seemed to send him spiraling even further into darkness. His paranoia intensified, his emotions became more erratic, and Neil they had once known began to fade before their eyes. Neil's sister, Deborah, became deeply concerned about her brother's rapid decline. She confided in their mother, worried about what he was going through. According to Deborah, Neil had started experiencing terrifying hallucinations. He had grown increasingly paranoid, convinced that someone or something was out to get him. Frankie, his wife, was just as alarmed. She desperate for support as Neil's behavior became more and more disturbing. He had completely withdrawn from the world, he refused to go outside, stopped engaging with friends and family, and even neglected his own hygiene. There were days when he wouldn't even shower, lost in a haze of fear and depression. His paranoia took a terrifying turn when he became obsessed with the idea that the FBI was watching him. He was convinced that federal agents were surveilling him, gathering evidence to have him arrested. He would talk about it constantly, warning anyone who would listen that they were building a case against him. His delusions became more elaborate. He was certain that his phone was tapped, that his home was under surveillance, and that at any moment, the authorities would storm in, take him away. His mother saw the full extent of his paranoia. One of the last times she visited him, Neil pulled her aside, his voice shaking with fear. He told her he was in big trouble, insisting that the FBI was coming for him, that he had done something terrible, though he couldn't seem to explain exactly what. The fear in his eyes was real, raw, and overwhelming. As Neil's mind unraveled, January 23, 2010. The darkness he had been wrestling with for months finally took over, and what happened next would shock everyone who had ever known him. That morning, Neil stood before his wardrobe, fumbling with the top shelf, his hands shaking as he retrieved a loaded gun. His wife, Frankie, still groggy from sleep, watched in confusion, not yet realizing the horror that was unfolding before her. Neil, with the gun in hand, stepped out of the wardrobe, his face hardening into something almost unrecognizable. Frankie's heart skipped a beat as the realization hit her. In an instant, panic took over. She leapt toward him, struggling desperately to wrest the weapon from his grasp. They tumbled to the floor, the fight becoming a chaotic blur of screams, desperation, and tears. In the midst of the struggle, Neil, in a violent frenzy, struck Frankie, knocking out her front tooth and slicing her finger. Despite the brutality of it all, Frankie didn't give up. She fought with all her strength, but Neil was too much, overpowering her in his disturbed state. With cold detachment, he stood, reloaded the gun, and turned the weapon on her. 2 shots rang out one after another, each striking her in the face, silencing her forever. But Neil's twisted path didn't end there, covered in Frankie's blood. He reloaded the gun and made his way to his son Eric's room. Eric, who had been lying on his stomach in peaceful sleep, was the next victim in the nightmare that Neil had somehow constructed in his mind. 2 bullets tore through Eric's body, but against all odds, the boy survived the first 2 shots. However, Neil was undeterred, his mind fixated on finishing what he had started. He grabbed a pillow and pressed it over Eric's face, ensuring his son wouldn't survive. 2 more shots, and Eric was gone. The house was eerily still now as Neil moved toward the next room, where his youngest son Joshua was sleeping. Joshua, blissfully unaware of the carnage around him, lay curled in his sheets. Neil's actions were methodical, almost as if he were following a script. He covered his son's face with a pillow, silencing him with 2 shots to the face. In a matter of moments, the vibrant lives of his family had been extinguished, with the blood of his wife and children staining his hands. Neil walked to the bathroom and turned on the shower. He stood under the water, numb, as if washing away the sins he could no longer escape. When the shower ended, he dressed, swallowed a cocktail of Vicodin and Xanax, in a haze, left his home. As he drove, the pills began to take effect, making him groggy and disoriented. Less than a mile from his mother's house, Neil passed out behind the wheel, swerving off the road and coming to a stop in the grass. Neil had initially planned to kill his mother, next before taking his own life. But in his twisted state, something inside him held him back. He later told the police that when he was at home, standing in the living room, he thought about going to heaven to be with his father, but he couldn't leave his mother alone, so he planned to take her with him. Thankfully, he never made it to her house. When the police found him, Neil was disoriented, barely conscious, and gripping the gun beside him. As they approached, he muttered, "I killed my family," in a dazed and broken voice. The investigation raised many questions. Was Neil a victim of the side effects of his medications, or had he planned this horrific act all along? A suicide note found later suggested that Neil may have been preparing for this moment, leaving many to wonder whether he was driven by his medications or if he had, at some point, simply snapped. His attorney's defense centered around his mental state. They argued that he had been suffering from severe depression, anxiety, and paranoia, all of which had been worsened by the medications he was taking. They described Neil overwhelmed by financial ruin, haunted by the fear that the FBI was watching him, and convinced that there was no way out. His legal team insisted that he had not acted out of hatred or rage but had instead been driven to an unimaginable breaking point due to the side effects of his prescription drugs. To support their argument, the defense brought in medical experts who testified about the dangers of Zoloft and Xanax, the 2 medications Neil had been prescribed before the murders. These drugs, they explained, could cause extreme mood swings, hallucinations, and suicidal tendencies, especially when taken together in high doses. Neil's behavior before the killings, his paranoia, delusions, and refusal to leave the house, was presented as clear evidence that he had lost his grip on reality. His lawyers pushed the narrative that Neil had been a loving father and husband, a man who had never shown any signs of violence before, making it hard to believe that he had killed his family intentionally. But the prosecution had a different story to tell. They painted Neil not as a victim of medication but as a desperate man who had methodically planned the murders. They argued that his financial troubles had reached a boiling point, and that instead of facing them, he had chosen to take his family's lives in an act of ultimate control. They pointed to the way he had executed the killings, retrieving his gun, reloading it multiple times, and ensuring that no one survived. To them, this was not the act of a man lost in a haze of confusion but one who had made a deliberate and calculated decision. One of the most compelling pieces of evidence against Neil was the suicide note found in his home. The note indicated that he had thought through his actions and accepted what he was about to do. It wasn't the frantic scribblings of someone in the middle of a psychotic episode, it was organized, reflective in the prosecution's view, proof of premeditation. If he had truly been unaware of his actions, why would he have left behind such a message? The prosecution also called witnesses to testify about Neil's behavior leading up to the murders. His sister, Deborah, had noticed a dramatic shift in his personality. He had become increasingly paranoid. His wife, Frankie, had confided in Deborah that Neil was no longer the man she had married. He had stopped showering, refused to leave the house, and seemed trapped in his own mind. While the defense used these accounts to argue that Neil was suffering from a mental breakdown, the prosecution used them to show that there had been warning signs, signs that should have led Neil to seek professional help instead of resorting to murder. Neil's mother, Goldie, also played a heartbreaking role in the trial. She had been one of the last people to see him before the tragedy. She recalled how Neil had told her, "Mom, I love you, no matter what happens." The courtroom fell silent. At the time, she hadn't thought much of it, but in hindsight, it was clear he had been preparing for what he was about to do. Goldie, who had always seen her son as a kind and loving man. She struggled to reconcile the Neil she knew with the one on trial for murder. As the trial progressed, the jury was left to decide whether Neil Jacobson had truly been in a state of antidepressants-induced psychosis or if he had coldly and deliberately murdered his wife and children. The prosecution emphasized that Neil had made a series of conscious choices, loading his gun, aiming at his loved ones, and pulling the trigger multiple times. They argued that no matter what struggles he was facing, nothing justified what he had done. The defense, on the other hand, urged the jury to consider his mental state, to see him as a broken man who had been consumed by fear, paranoia, and desperation. After days of deliberation, the jury reached a verdict: guilty on all counts. The judge, while acknowledging the tragedy of the situation, made it clear that no level of financial distress or mental illness excused the murder of innocent children and a devoted wife. Neil Jacobson was sentenced to life in prison without the possibility of parole. His fate was sealed, and the courtroom was filled with an overwhelming sense of loss. Neil Jacobson reached a plea deal with the state. He changed his plea from not guilty to guilty of 3 counts of first-degree murder. He stated that the reason was the family's mounting financial situation. Now, he will spend the rest of his life behind bars. Neil Jacobson answered to the judge in the Palm Beach County courtroom, admitting that he shot his wife, Frankie, and then shot their twin 7-year-old sons while they were asleep in their Wellington home back. During the family's turn to speak in court, Neil held his head down and never looked up. Even after the trial ended, many questions remained. Could this tragedy have been prevented if Neil had received different treatment? Were the medications to blame, or was he simply a man who refused to face his failures? No one could say for certain what had driven him to this point. However, what was undeniable was that a mother and 2 young boys had lost their lives in the most horrific way possible. Nothing could ever undo that. Hello again, true crime fans. We've got another mysterious case to explore. The case of Thomas Kwan. On January 22, 2024, Patrick O'Hara, 70, presented to the emergency department at the Royal Victoria Infirmary in Newcastle upon Tyne with severe pain in his upper arm, particularly at the site of the vaccine injection he had received a few hours earlier. Initially, the medical staff suspected that his pain was a result of a poor injection. They provided him with antibiotics and painkillers, advised him to monitor his arm closely. However, Patrick's situation worsened. Within hours, his arm developed blisters and changed color. The following day, he returned to the hospital, where doctors were confused by the rapid decline in his condition. Blood tests were performed but did not reveal any significant issues. Eventually, it became evident that Patrick was experiencing a necrotizing infection that was damaging his tissue, particularly around the injection site. It was likely that he had not received a vaccine but rather a toxin that led to these serious complications. To contain the infection and save Patrick's life, he required surgery to remove the infected tissue. Meanwhile, specialists were working to identify the substance that had caused his condition, as knowing the specific poison involved could help doctors formulate a more effective treatment plan. Dr. Emmett, an expert in the field, suggested that iodomethane could be responsible for Patrick's condition. Iodomethane is highly toxic, and exposure can cause burns and blisters similar to those Patrick was experiencing. There had been no prior instances of methane injections in humans, making its use particularly risky, and the substance is almost impossible to detect in the body. At around 10 a.m. on the morning of January 22nd, while Patrick was feeling ill, a male nurse named Raj Patel from the National Health Service arrived at his home. Nurse Raj Patel was assigned to examine Patrick and arrived at his and his partner Jenny's residence. He spoke with an Asian accent and in broken English, appearing slightly awkward but competent. The visit lasted about 4 minutes, during which he collected blood and urine samples from Patrick. Jenny, Patrick's partner, came downstairs during the check and asked to have her blood pressure taken, to which Raj agreed. After that, Patrick started preparing to administer a booster vaccine. Even though he mentioned that he had already received this vaccine less than 3 months earlier, Raj insisted that he needed another dose. When Raj administered the injection, Patrick experienced sharp and intense pain. Raj assured him that this was a normal reaction and that the pain would soon subside. However, after giving the injection, Raj quickly gathered his equipment and left the house, which Patrick found suspicious. At the hospital, where Patrick was placed in intensive care, the doctors noticed several letters that he and Jenny had received recently. They informed Jenny that there was no local nursing staff and that the National Health Service had no nurse named Raj Patel. This letter turned out to be a forgery, and the health worker was a fraud. The forgery was well crafted. It featured the National Health Service logo at the top, included hyperlinks, and used medical language along with personal privacy notes typical of unofficial reports. Another letter, sent earlier that month, followed a similar format. It included a QR code that directed Patrick to a short health questionnaire and suggested a home visit on January 22nd between 9 a.m. and 1 p.m. The day before this, Patrick received a reminder text message from an unknown number, claiming to be from a health worker named Patel. However, Patrick only became suspicious when Nurse Raj began to act nervously during the injection. One particular action raised alarms. As Raj was leaving, Jenny came down the stairs and told him he was as tall as her son. This startled Patrick, and she chased after him, but he disappeared. Northumbria police then began tracking him from his home in Newcastle city centre. CCTV footage showed him driving to a hotel and checking in. Raj arrived in a car with fake number plates. He checked into the hotel using a false name. 2 hours later, he left his room wearing a long coat, a flat cap, blue surgical gloves, and a medical mask. He walked through the hotel lobby and exited the building. It was less than a 10-minute walk from the hotel to Patrick and Jenny's home on St. Thomas's Street. In the UK, number plates are specific to the make and model of the vehicle they are assigned to. The number plates on Raj's vehicle were easily identifiable as counterfeit. They matched the car's make but not its model. Investigators traced the car back to the hotel that morning and then to its original location, which led them to the small town of Ingleby Barwick, south of Newcastle in Stockton. The car had left the home of Thomas Kwan, son of Jenny Leung. Jenny has several sons from her first marriage, but she noticed a resemblance between her eldest son, Thomas Kwan, 50, and Raj Patel. Thomas was born in Hong Kong and moved to the UK 39 years ago at the age of 13. His parents sent him to an English boarding school, and he later studied medicine at Newcastle University. He is now a general practitioner and a partner at Happy House Clinic in Sunderland, about a half-hour's drive from his mother's home. Thomas had a troubled relationship with his mother, likely stemming from their parents' divorce that occurred 27 years ago. Many of Thomas's issues with her revolved around money. He believed that before their separation, his mother, Jenny, had taken £1 million from their joint account and pressured his father into the divorce. Years later, when his father passed away, Thomas was upset to find that he received a smaller portion of the inheritance compared to his younger brother. In a letter to his mother, Thomas expressed his feelings, accusing her of being unfair and of stealing money from his father. He asked her to clarify the changes in the will and accused her of betrayal. Patrick, trying to ease the tension, asked Thomas to leave the house and confronted him emotionally. Jenny's actions further complicated the family dynamics. The police were called to the scene, but Thomas left before they arrived. This incident deeply affected the relationship between him and his mother, Jenny. Since then, Thomas has had little contact with her and has not visited. When authorities began investigating the case of the fake nurse, they discovered that Thomas's name appeared in their review of the nurse's route. CCTV footage showed the car traveling from Newcastle to Ingleby Barwick, heading directly to Thomas's house. This connection raised suspicions among investigators, who found it odd that a vehicle linked to the crime was seen near Thomas's residence. They quickly sought more information about him. It was revealed that there had been a conflict over a will, which could have provided a motive for his involvement. Investigators also discovered that Thomas had previously purchased chemicals, including toxic substances, which could have been used to create the agent that made Patrick sick. These online purchases became a significant focus of the investigation. The police then searched Thomas's home and found packages of chemical reagents and equipment in his garage that resembled a laboratory. They also discovered medical supplies, including syringes, gloves, and protective masks. On Thomas's computer, investigators found searches relating to toxic substances and how to use them. Additionally, there were fake National Health Service forms that matched those sent to Patrick and Jenny. Further investigation revealed that Thomas had planned the crime well in advance, using his medical expertise and available resources. He fabricated an elaborate story to pose as a fake nurse, knowing exactly how to speak, present himself, and what documents to provide. However, his rushed escape after administering the injection, along with other blunders, ultimately worked against him. The police arrested Thomas on February 15, 2024. At the time of his arrest, he denied any involvement in Patrick's poisoning, but the evidence against him grew increasingly compelling. The case was classified as attempted murder, and preparations were made for it to go to court. Thomas leveraged his medical reputation and knowledge to create a false appearance of professionalism. He orchestrated the entire scheme to avoid detection until it was too late. During a search of his home, police discovered not only chemicals and instructions but also complete production equipment, including measuring instruments, protective suits, and laboratory containers. The investigation revealed that Thomas had been planning his crime for an extended period, gathering resources and researching their characteristics. His mobile phone contained clear evidence of his intentions, showing multiple internet searches for poisons. He specifically looked for information on how to use ricin to carry out a slow and painful murder. His searches included terms like ricin dosage, duration of the toxin, and cyanide effects on the human body, indicating that he aimed to proceed carefully and minimize errors. Despite his planning, Thomas made several mistakes that led to the investigation uncovering his scheme. For example, he used a fake license plate on his car, but the police quickly noticed that the plates didn't match the car model. Additionally, his disguise as a nurse was inadequate. Jenny's comment that he resembled her son raised initial suspicions. His quick departure from home after administering the injection and his suspicious behavior further contributed to the doubts about him. Books on toxicology and instructions for creating poisons found in Thomas's possession strengthened the case against him. Additionally, a copy of the National Center of Excellence for Police Investigation Manual on Murder was discovered on his computer. This manual could provide a criminal with insights on how to avoid detection. The evidence suggested that Thomas planned to commit the murder with great precision while minimizing the risk of being caught. What was particularly alarming was how he manipulated his family. The letters, text messages, and Thomas's fabricated identity as a nurse indicated that he was orchestrating a large-scale scheme. It was shocking to think that a doctor, someone who was supposed to save lives, was involved in such a heinous crime. When arrested, Thomas denied all accusations. However, the evidence gathered, including chemicals, laboratory equipment, books, and digital records, painted an undeniable picture of his guilt. The investigation revealed that he acted with cold calculation, leveraging his expertise and resources to commit a deliberate poisoning with the intent to kill. He refused to admit guilt regarding attempted murder, but the evidence, including his internet searches, was compelling. The police also found that Thomas had been spying on his mother and her partner, Patrick. He had installed spyware on a laptop they gave him, which allowed him to monitor their daily activities, read emails, and track financial transactions in real time, taking screenshots and saving correspondence to support his suspicions of misuse of the family's money. What was especially shocking was that Thomas devised multiple plans for the murder before finally deciding to impersonate a nurse. One of his ideas involved sending poisoned drinks or food while pretending to be part of a made-up group called the Northern Wine Tasting Club, offering free samples. These plans revealed just how far he was willing to go to achieve his goal. When Thomas created the nurse persona, Raj Patel, he made a fake ID with his own picture, used a wig, and glued on a beard. He not only had a detailed cover story but also props to support his disguise in case anyone questioned him. During the 40 minutes he spent in the house, he managed to deceive even his own mother by acting like a caring healthcare worker. This revelation stunned those who knew Thomas. Patients were shocked to find out that their doctor was involved in such a crime. Many expressed that the trust typically inspired by a man in a doctor's uniform was ruthlessly exploited. Residents in the neighborhood watched in horror as the investigation disrupted their quiet suburb. While Patrick was in intensive care, doctors worked hard to save his life. He underwent several surgeries to remove dead tissue and stop the infection from spreading further. Additionally, he needed plastic surgery to repair the damage to his arm. Fortunately, Patrick survived, but he faces a long road to full recovery. Thomas Kwan was arrested but refused to cooperate with the medical team trying to determine what substance was injected into Patrick. By staying silent, he raised suspicions that he deliberately aimed to cause serious harm. The investigation indicated that he probably used iodine. During the proceedings, Thomas asserted that he did not intend to kill anyone, he merely sought to inflict mild pain or discomfort. However, when his trial commenced in Newcastle in October 2024, this assertion quickly fell apart in light of the evidence presented. Prosecutor Peter Makepeace, in his opening statement, reminded the jury that sometimes reality can be stranger than fiction. He pointed out that Thomas's careful and detailed planning suggested that his intentions were far more serious than he claimed. Thomas's knowledge of poisons, his extensive research, and his experience made it clear that he fully understood the life-threatening nature of his actions. Moreover, Thomas's motivation went beyond mere financial gain. Even though the inheritance he received after dividing property with his relatives was relatively small, his feelings of grievance ran deeper. He accused his mother of not loving him enough during his childhood and framed the attack on Patrick, her partner, as a means to emotionally hurt her in revenge. On the second day of the trial, October 7, 2024, Thomas pleaded guilty, which spared the court from weeks of hearings. The victim, Patrick O'Hara, shared how the attack affected his life. Thomas received a severe sentence that reflected both the seriousness of his crime and the level of planning involved. The judge noted that while some aspects of Thomas's plan were poorly executed, such as using fake license plates that didn't match the car model, he had put a significant amount of effort into preparing for the crime. This level of planning justified a lengthy sentence. Thomas Kwan was sentenced to 31 years and 5 months in prison. His guilty plea and clean record prior to the incident were taken into consideration during sentencing. Patrick O'Hara faced challenges in his recovery, suffering from post-traumatic stress disorder, which ultimately led to the end of his long-term relationship with Jenny. Despite these difficulties, Patrick expressed his appreciation for the professionals at the National Health Service who saved his life. After the trial, he gradually returned to a normal routine, though he continued to experience physical and emotional reminders of the attack. Nonetheless, this incident became a catalyst for new beginnings for him. After parting ways with Jenny, he relocated from Newcastle to a quiet coastal town where he found peace. While there, Patrick focused on helping victims of violence and fraud. He began speaking at conferences and in the media to share his story and emphasize the importance of remaining vigilant, even in everyday situations. Meanwhile, Jenny, overwhelmed by her son's actions and her guilt toward Patrick, worked on improving her family relationships. She stepped back from public life to concentrate on her family, but her bond with Thomas was never repaired. In prison, Thomas Kwan began to understand the seriousness of his actions. In isolation, he had to confront his motives and the harm he had caused to his family. However, prison records indicated that he still had a long way to go before he felt true remorse. At the beginning of his sentence, he continued to rationalize his actions, feeling a sense of injustice. Patrick, who had endured many hardships, found happiness in simple pleasures, like walks by the sea and friendships with those who valued him for who he was. He often expressed that his greatest achievement was learning to trust again. Although the scars on his hand never disappeared, he came to see them not as reminders of pain, but as symbols of the strength he discovered to keep moving forward, even in the toughest times. Hello everyone, today we will learn about another case. The case of the DeFeo family. To truly understand it all, let's first get to know the DeFeo family, who once lived in a house at 112 Ocean Avenue in Amityville, Long Island, New York. Ronald Joseph DeFeo Sr., more commonly known as Big Ronnie, was born on November 16, 1930, to parents Rocco and Antoinette DeFeo. When he was younger, Big Ronnie was slender, handsome, and had a powerful gaze reminiscent of the legendary Rudolph Valentino. With his suave looks, he attracted the attention of Louise Marie DeFeo, who was born on November 3, 1931, to Michael John Briganti Jr. and Angelina Maria Briganti. Louise had aspirations of becoming a model. She was beautiful enough to mingle with the best, including the famous singer Mel Torme. After a brief courtship, Big Ronnie and Louise married. However, the Briganti family disapproved of Big Ronnie, cutting all ties with the newlyweds until September 26, 1951, when their son Ronald DeFeo Jr. was born. He would later be known as Butch. Growing up, Butch faced many struggles as the firstborn son. His father expected a lot from him, and Big Ronnie was not afraid to discipline Butch in harsh ways. One minute he would hug his son, and the next he would throw him across the room. Louise's brother, Michael John Briganti Jr., would later testify at the DeFeo trial about an incident he witnessed when Butch was only 2 years old. He recalled, "They were all sitting down in the basement watching TV, and he don't know what the boy had done, but all of a sudden, the father just pushed the boy into the wall. The boy banged his head or part of his shoulder or something." As a child, Butch was extremely overweight, a problem that would persist until his late teenage years when he began using amphetamines. His school life suffered as a result, with bigger kids often teasing him and calling him names like the Blob, Bucky Beaver, and Pork Chop. On July 29, 1956, Louise gave birth to a daughter, Dawn Teresa DeFeo. A few years later, on August 16, 1961, Louise gave birth to Allison Louise, and then again on September 4, 1962, to Mark Gregory. Sometime after Mark's birth, Louise decided to leave her husband for reasons that remain unclear. To win her back, Big Ronnie determination to express his love. On October 24, 1965, Big Ronnie was blessed with a third son, John Matthew. By this time, the family had moved from their Brooklyn apartment to a lavish home on the south shore of Long Island in the affluent community of Amityville. Many wondered how Big Ronnie, working as a car dealer service manager, could afford such a luxurious home. The answer was clear: his father-in-law, Michael John Briganti Sr. In the early 1970s, Big Ronnie decided he wanted life-sized portraits to immortalize his family. Michael Jr. picked up the tab, which was estimated to be at least $50,000. The painstakingly detailed portraits took over a year to complete, and when finished, they hung in large golden frames on the staircase wall between the first and second floors of the DeFeo home. By this point, Butch had become increasingly troublesome as he got older. The DeFeos owned an auto body shop where Butch worked, but he spent more time at bars than actually working. His growing addiction to banned substance and alcohol only made things worse, driving him to violence against his own family. There was even an incident where he pulled a gun on his father, and countless other times he lashed out physically at those closest to him. Then, in the early hours of November 13, 1974, Butch completely snapped. Armed with a rifle, he moved silently through the house, murdering his family members one by one as they slept. What's truly chilling about this is that, despite the brutal killings taking place within just 15 minutes, the bodies showed no signs of struggle. Even more bizarre, the sound of gunshots didn't wake any of the other family members, or at least didn't rouse them from their beds. The bodies were found all face down on their beds, almost as if they had been carefully placed that way. To add to the eerie nature of the crime, the rifle had no silencer, yet aside from the family dog barking, none of the neighbors reported hearing a single gunshot that night. After committing the horrific murders, Butch calmly took a bath, got dressed for work, and then reported the crime, claiming he discovered the gruesome scene after returning home. He even suggested that a mafia hitman, Louis Fellini, along with 2 accomplices, was responsible. However, a police interview soon revealed serious inconsistencies in his story. The next day, Butch admitted to carrying out the murders himself. Fellini, the supposed hitman, had an airtight alibi, proving he was out of state at the time of the killings. DeFeo confessed, saying, once he started, he just couldn't stop. It went so fast. He went on to explain how he took a bath, changed his clothes, and carefully disposed of key evidence, including his blood-stained clothes, the Marlin rifle, and cartridges, before going to work as if nothing had happened. It was claimed that Butch had been hearing voices that urged him to commit the murders. However, the prosecution brought in a psychiatrist. According to the psychiatrist, Butch wasn't hearing voices or possessed by another personality. He simply didn't see anything wrong with killing his family. Because of that, DeFeo was convicted on 6 counts of murder and sentenced to 6 consecutive life terms, which he continued to serve at the Sullivan Correctional Facility in New York until he died on March 12, 2021. Just over a year after the tragic deaths of the DeFeo family, the home on Ocean Boulevard was sold to the Lutz family, who would soon unknowingly step into a new chapter of horror. The Amityville home, marked by its horrific past, raises the question of whether the tragic events left behind some lingering eerie energy haunting the land where it all unfolded. However, the Lutz family wouldn't have to wonder for long. They would soon share their own unsettling experiences in the home. Although the price was a bit higher than their budget of $30,000 to $50,000, something about the house pulled them in. It was a beautiful colonial-style home with 6 bedrooms, a heated pool, and a boathouse sitting right on the Amityville River. Don't think for a second that the Lutz family wasn't aware of the horrific murders that had taken place there. In fact, they knew all about the house's dark past. But despite that, the Lutzes fell in love with the property and decided it was meant to be theirs. They bought the house for a bargain price of $80,000, never once thinking it was unlivable because of its tragic history. However, what was supposed to be their dream home soon turned into a waking nightmare. The strange and terrifying events that followed were later shared with the world by author Jay Anson in his famous book, The Amityville Horror. Before moving into the house, George Lutz was a successful businessman, but after settling in new house, something changed. He became sluggish, cold, and irritable. Most bizarre of all, he started waking up at 3:15 in the morning every night, unable to get back to sleep. It wasn't just random, it was the exact time the DeFeo murders had occurred. One night, George was startled to see his 5-year-old daughter, Missy, standing by her bedroom window. But what sent chills down his spine was the eerie outline of a pig's face with glowing red eyes staring at him from behind her. He rushed into her room, only to find Missy sound asleep, as if nothing had happened. Not long after, Missy talked about a new friend, an imaginary pig named Jody. But was Jody really imaginary? In another bone-chilling moment, George looked at his wife Kathy as she lay sleeping, but something was horribly wrong. Her face had distorted and aged, as if she'd become a 90-year-old woman overnight. At times, Kathy seemed to undergo strange transformations, aging rapidly and looking like someone else entirely. Her mother even witnessed this unnatural change firsthand. But the strange events didn't stop there. The house seemed to have a mind of its own. Doors were ripped off their hinges, and in the middle of a freezing winter, a room was suddenly filled with flies. Outside, cloven hoofprints appeared in the snow, right near their doorstep. Inside, green slime started to ooze down the walls, and then in the basement, they discovered a hidden room that didn't appear on any of the house's original blueprints. The room was painted a deep, unsettling red and was only large enough for 2 people to sit close together. But what was even more disturbing was the faint rancid odor that lingered in the room, adding to the overwhelming sense of dread that hung in the air. George even tried bringing their family dog into the mysterious basement room, but the animal refused to step inside. The usually dog backed away, tail tucked, and whimpered in fear. It was the first time George had ever seen the dog so terrified, as if it sensed something lurking in the shadows, something invisible to human eyes but deeply unsettling to an animal's instincts. The eerie experiences didn't stop there. One night, George was jolted awake by the unmistakable sound of a band playing downstairs. The lively music echoed through the house as if an invisible group was holding a late-night gathering. Confused and unnerved, he made his way to the living room to investigate, but the moment he stepped inside, everything went silent. No music, no people, nothing. Yet something had definitely been there. The rug had been rolled up, and the furniture had been shifted, as if a dance floor had been cleared for a ghostly celebration. Desperate for help, the Lutz family reached out to a priest, hoping for some kind of blessing or relief from the terrifying events. However, the moment the priest stepped into the house, things took a dark turn. He was overwhelmed by a sudden intense sickness and began to experience his own set of unexplained disturbances. Some force seemed to be warning him to stay away. The impact of these events reached far beyond the Lutz family. Author Jay Anson recalled how meeting the priest convinced him that this was more than just a story, it was real. From there, he started to create the book. On January 14, 1976, after just 28 days of living in what they thought would be their dream home, the Lutz family experienced a night so terrifying that they made a split-second decision. They packed a few bags, left everything else behind, and fled, never to return. According to a 2005 interview with George Lutz, he emphasized that their departure wasn't planned. They didn't wake up that morning thinking they were leaving for good. This was their home. When they left, they didn't know they wouldn't be coming back. They didn't know that everything they left behind they would never see again. Their abandoned belongings, untouched and frozen in time, were later set to be auctioned off. The house that had once seemed like a fresh start had turned into something they could never return to. Determined to share their horrifying experience, the Lutz family recounted every chilling detail to writer Anson. He would go on to transform their story into the instant bestseller in 1977. The book gripped the public, with the Los Angeles Times calling it both fascinating and frightening. Some critics believed its success wasn't just about ghosts and haunted houses. They argued that the story resonated with people because of the unstable political and economic climate in the United States at the time. Rampant inflation, rising interest rates, a crippling oil shortage had left the country anxious and uneasy. As the story unfolds, it becomes clear that the horrors inside the Amityville house weren't the only ones haunting the Lutz family. Their business was struggling due to the failing economy, and at the worst possible time, the IRS launched an investigation into their taxes. For many readers in the late 70s, this felt all too real, paranormal or not. Financial stress and uncertainty were things they knew all too well. By blending supernatural terror with real, life struggles, the Amityville Horror struck a nerve with the American public. It wasn't just a ghost story, it was a reflection of the fears people were living with every day. Some critics even argued that the book cleverly capitalized on popular horror trends of the time, the trope of a once-loving father turning violent and unrecognizable. When asked if he had experienced anything strange while writing the book, Anson quickly dismissed the idea, replying, "No, however, he did suffer a heart attack soon after finishing it, though he insisted it was due to his smoking and unhealthy lifestyle rather than anything paranormal." But while Anson shrugged off any supernatural connection, eerie incidents followed those who got too close to the story. Several people who handled early copies of the manuscript reportedly had near-fatal encounters. One of Anson's friends had a fire break out in his car while driving the manuscript back to the publisher. Another friend and his son nearly drowned when their car plunged into the water, but when rescuers opened the trunk, the manuscript inside was mysteriously dry, despite being stored in a simple clasped envelope. In the most chilling case, a woman who had been given the first 2 chapters to read died in a house fire the very night she received them, and among the charred remains of her home, the pages of the manuscript were found completely untouched. The terrifying tale of the Lutz family has since been adapted into several films, with the most famous being the 1979 version starring James Brolin. In 2005, the Amityville Horror returned to the big screen with Ryan Reynolds stepping into the role of George Lutz, following in the footsteps of James Brolin. Both movies stayed true to the eerie backstory of the infamous house where a gruesome mass murder had taken place, but they each took creative liberties to crank up the terror. Then there's how the house itself is portrayed. The older film leans into the idea that the house is a sinister entity influencing Ronald DeFeo Jr. to kill his family in 1974, while the remake shifts the horror to the ghosts of the victims, making them the primary source of terror. The priest who tried to help the Lutz family also meets different fates depending on the version. In the book, he hears a voice commanding him to get out and later becomes ill, eventually giving up on helping the family. The films, however, escalate the horror, showing him being attacked by swarms of supernatural flies and even going blind. Regardless of these differences, one chilling fact remains: an entire family was murdered in that house. Yet despite the Lutz family's claims of paranormal experiences in 1975, no other owners have reported hauntings since. According to the Washington Post and real estate firm Coldwell Banker, Harbor Light, 4 different families have lived in the house after the Lutzes. A previous owner even had the address changed to avoid unwanted attention. The last time the house went up for sale was in the summer of 2016, and it was sold in February 2017 for just over $600,000, significantly less than the $950,000 it was purchased for in 2010. As for the real murders that took place, while Butch was eventually found dead in his prison cell, there are countless versions of events and interviews he gave before his death. In an interview from 1986, Butch claimed that his sister Dawn killed their father, and that their mother killed his siblings before he killed her. He later filed a motion in 1990 stating that Dawn and an unknown assailant were the real killers, that he only shot Dawn by accident during a struggle. Despite his shifting stories, his claims were always met with skepticism. In 2000, he spoke with author R.I. Auna, asserting that his parents plotted to kill him, which led him to join forces with Dawn and others in desperation. Butch's narrative continued to evolve, becoming increasingly distant with details about the events and unreliable witnesses. His claims, including involvement from his wife Geraldine Gates, only deepened the mystery, with authorities and experts disproving many of his assertions. Now, it's easy to lean toward the idea that Butch was simply a psychopath driven by childhood trauma or addiction, who saw no problem in killing his family. However, if the lingering souls of his victims did haunt the Lutz family, we can only hope they found justice and peace. The saga of the DeFeo family in the house at 112 Ocean Avenue remains one of the most haunting and enigmatic chapters in American crime and lore. From Ronald Butch's cold-blooded slaughter of his family in 1974 to the Lutz family's harrowing 28-day ordeal a year later, the Amityville Horror transcends a mere murder case, weaving a tapestry of trauma, mystery, and supernatural intrigue. Butch's shifting confessions and unrepentant nature leave us questioning whether his actions stem from a fractured mind or something darker, while the Lutz's flight from inexplicable terror suggests the house itself may hold echoes of its violent past. Decades later, with Butch gone and the house standing quietly under new ownership, its legacy endures, immortalized in books and films, yet shrouded in doubt. Whether driven by human evil or lingering spirits, the tragedy of Amityville serves as a chilling reminder of the shadows that can lurk within families and homes, leaving us to wonder where the line between reality and nightmare truly lies. Jessica Edens was born on January 22, 1981, in a small suburb of New York State, USA. She came from a large family, with a sister named Diane and two half-brothers, Nathan and Adam. Jessica spent her early years surrounded by loving parents and siblings, with whom she developed warm relationships. She didn't have outstanding academic success but was always creative, dreaming of becoming a photographer. When her parents recognized this passion, they bought her an amateur camera, which she carried everywhere. She took pictures of people, nature, cities, and architecture, anything that caught her attention. Her work was admired and praised. During her teenage years, Jessica actively pursued this passion and mastered the craft. She began to shoot weddings and various events, initially for free, then for a small fee. This allowed her to earn enough money for her own needs, and the idea of building a real business became increasingly appealing. Jessica's personal life was also progressing. She was sociable, active, attractive, and always attracted a lot of attention. On November 19, 2007, she gave birth to a son named Hayden King. Jessica became pregnant during a rapidly developing relationship with a young man, but the love between them faded quickly, and they broke up before Hayden was born. However, Jessica remained optimistic and maintained friendly relations with the child's biological father, allowing him to communicate with Hayden. Jessica was determined to provide everything her child needed, regardless of whether she had a partner or was raising him as a single mother. Fortunately, she did not have to be alone for long. In 2008, Jessica met a man named Benjamin Edens. They quickly found common ground, grew closer, and within a few meetings, they could not imagine their lives without each other. They was in no hurry to officially register their marriage, as both were creative individuals who understood each other well. After a few months, they moved in together, and Jessica began to contemplate having more children. After a while, they officially got married in 2010. Shortly thereafter, they decided to move to a new large house located in a small, cozy town in Easley, South Carolina, which was ideal for a quiet family life. Their family relationships flourished, and Jessica was convinced she had found the man of her dreams, a feeling that was mutual. 2 years later, on July 19, 2012, they welcomed a daughter named Harper Edens. Jessica believes this further strengthens her relationship with Benjamin. He was a wonderful father who spent all his free time with Harper. He also became so close to Hayden that the boy did not suspect Benjamin was not his biological father. By 2017, Hayden was in the 4th grade, while his younger sister Harper was about to start 1st grade in the fall. This was an exciting milestone. From the outside, Jessica's family appeared perfect. She had 2 children, a beloved job, and a husband whom she described to everyone as the best person. Her eldest child was a good student, and the family expected the same from Harper. Jessica's passion for photography thrived, but when she had her daughter, she decided to take a break and become a housewife, stepping back from her small but successful photo business. However, as Harper grew more independent, Jessica returned to attending various events to conduct professional photography. To simplify her client search, she created a website where she introduced herself as a photographer from Greenville. Jessica described her life as perfect, but, as often happens, things were exaggerated. Behind the facade of love and understanding, difficulties began to arise in the marriage. Over time, Benjamin's feelings cooled, and tension accumulated between them. Jessica wanted to understand what was happening as she began to notice uncharacteristic behaviors in her husband. He would come home from work, immediately run into the shower without even saying hello to his wife and children, as if he were trying to hide something. More and more often, he stayed at work much longer than his shift lasted, citing overtime and global projects that no one could confirm. He began to actively engage in sports, carefully monitored his appearance, and switched to healthy eating. All this could look like ordinary healthy habits that people develop with age, but not with Jessica. She began to suspect Benjamin of cheating. Quickly, a suitable candidate for an affair appeared. A young, attractive woman had recently started at her husband's workplace. This woman's name was Meredith Rahm. She was born on October 29, 1988, in Collierville, Tennessee. In Jessica's opinion, it was on Meredith that her husband had set his eyes. In the early years of Meredith's life, her parents divorced, and her mother quickly found a new man and remarried, so Meredith had a stepfather named Carlton Chambers. He was a worthy person and became like a second father to her. The family in which she grew up was friendly and loving. Meredith had a younger sister named Brittany Rowell. She dedicated herself to her studies from an early age and was focused on career success. She studied well and was creative, like Jessica, but family and children were of little interest to her. In 2009, she graduated from the University of Memphis with a bachelor's degree in international business. After gaining some necessary experience, she moved to Greenville. Meredith was very independent and self-confident, which immediately caught Benjamin's eye. By the time they met, Meredith had started working at the same company as Benjamin. In fact, Jessica's suspicions were justified. Immediately after meeting Meredith, her husband became attracted to her. Their feelings come from both sides. They started dating in secret, and their affair continued for a year. Now, Benjamin finally realized that he wanted to be with his young mistress and wanted to break up with Jessica, but he didn't know how to approach the issue. He was afraid of offending his wife and wanted to avoid the difficulties of the divorce process. For a long time, Benjamin was torn between his family and his mistress. His wife's suspicions only aggravated the situation. The more accusations she made, the more inevitable the breakup felt, which provoked constant quarrels. Jessica did not trust her husband and wanted to find out what was going on. He tried to distance himself, but this could not go on forever. It was time to tell the truth, but Benjamin could not bring himself to do it. Instead of confessing, he decided to move out on far-fetched grounds, citing constant pressure from his wife. On April 11, 2017, Benjamin packed his things and moved from the shared family home to a rented apartment. At least that is what he initially told his wife. Jessica kept hoping that these were only temporary difficulties that many people experience, and that their marriage would be saved. She believed she could convince her husband to return to her and their children. Benjamin tried to avoid the topic of separation altogether, reluctantly answered calls and messages, which only offended her more. The betrayal was of such a magnitude that she could not forgive it. She was angry, and her hopes for a family reunion were shattered. But most of all, she was furious that Benjamin simply ignored her. As the persecution began, Jessica spread various damaging facts about Meredith on all social networks and on any sites where she could post information, exposing her as the homewrecker and her husband as a cheater. Jessica continued to communicate regularly with Benjamin, trying to win him back. Instead, he finally decided to file for divorce. Telling Jessica this provoked even more anger from her, and she now decided to annoy him as much as possible. She knew how much Benjamin loved their daughter Harper, so she sought sole custody of the girl. He had always been a caring father and loved the children, including Hayden. Therefore, he was against such a decision. Benjamin wanted to maintain the right to communicate with the children. He did not want to sit idly by. He hoped to smooth over the conflict and therefore proposed joint custody. Jessica was adamant. Against this backdrop, a serious custody battle began, and tensions escalated. Realizing that it would not be possible to agree amicably, Benjamin went to court on July 11th. He wanted to gain an advantage and testified under oath that Jessica was using the children as a weapon of revenge. By this point, Jessica had completely prevented meetings and communication between the children with their father, not even allowing contact through social networks and mobile phones. Everything was under her total control. Benjamin was afraid she could go too far. Simultaneously, Jessica intensified her harassment of Benjamin and Meredith. She continued to post not just hateful words toward Meredith on social media but also use graphic photos and other offensive captions. Previously, Jessica had tried to portray Benjamin's mistress as a family destroyer. Now, even more disturbing captions began to appear. She claimed that Meredith would get what she deserved, though she never specified what she meant. Meredith, the target of the harassment, began to fear that all of this could be dangerous. However, Benjamin insisted that Jessica had no history of violence, so he believed the situation would gradually settle down. He tried not to provoke her further, but it had little effect. The situation only worsened. When Jessica learned about the filing of a joint custody application by her husband, she was furious. Benjamin had always been a decent person, a valuable employee who earned a good salary and had no bad habits or addictions, so there were no serious grounds for denying him custody or terminating his contact with the children. He simply wanted to see them. Now that he had received the right to visit, which Jessica could not oppose. Due to the impossibility of taking revenge, she began to come up with more sophisticated ways to annoy him. Every short communication with Benjamin ended in conflicts and accusations. It was even more annoying to her that the mistress would be in contact with the children. During this period, Benjamin and Meredith regularly contacted the police to complain about Jessica's behavior. In particular, Meredith could no longer tolerate the publications that Jessica made about her daily on various social networks. She starts having problems at work when Jessica tries to turn things around her. Benjamin tried to prove that Jessica's behavior was stalking and very disturbing. Worse, he began receiving frightening messages from Jessica, all concerning the children. It seemed she was trying to intimidate him with ambiguous phrases, and he worried that his daughter might be in danger. In July 2017, after a court meeting, he called the police to check on the welfare of the children at Jessica's house. He described the situation in detail. He felt powerless since Jessica still interfered with the meetings, and he did not want to use force, fearing she would use this in court against him to strip him of his joint custody rights. The officers who responded reported that everything was fine, but the anxiety from the threats continued to grow. On July 12, they discussed joint custody again. All attempts by Jessica to prevent this were unsuccessful, making her even more furious. During the day, Benjamin begins to receive more disturbing messages from his ex-wife. It was obvious to her that there was no legal way to limit the children's communication with their father, so she tried to irritate him further with her frightening messages. Benjamin contacted the police again and asked the patrol officers to go to the family home to check on the children's well-being. When the officers arrived, they again did not see anything suspicious. The report compiled by the patrolman stated that everything was fine, the family seemed normal, Jessica behaved calmly, and her son and daughter were in a good mood while watching a movie when the officers arrived. At that moment, Jessica insisted that Harper call Benjamin, realizing that he had called the police. All of this became part of her insidious plan to expose him as a liar. While the officer was in the house, he discussed the potential resumption of relations with Benjamin. Jessica denied wanting to reconcile, calling him a traitor who had cheated for a whole year. She couldn't forgive him and intended to use this in court to achieve sole custody of their daughter. She didn't want him in the children's lives. While the officer was filling out the report, Jessica began insisting that Benjamin and Meredith were very dangerous people, especially to the children. She claimed to have suffered from their behavior since the divorce process began and insisted that they were trying to portray her in a bad light. Jessica wanted to obtain a restraining order against them. The patrolman informed Jessica that, in order to get a restraining order, she would have to go through the court process after filing a report. After saying goodbye to the officers, she promised to file a statement in person soon, but that was not destined to happen. The next day, while Jessica's family was out of town, she went to her parents' house early in the morning and took a .40 caliber pistol that they used for self-defense. When relatives heard about this, Jessica warned her father about the need for a weapon, and he was not against it. They did not suspect the scale of the persecution that Jessica had arranged. She skillfully lied, making Benjamin look worse and referring to the persecution from him, that the danger emanating from her ex. Jessica claimed that she could not feel calm at home, she was simply afraid to be left alone with her 2 children. They were easily convinced that Benjamin and Meredith posed a threat, including to the children, and that the weapon would help protect them from what she described as extremely harmful communication. All of this sounded plausible, therefore, her parents had no problem with her needing the weapon for a while. Jessica planned to keep the gun in the house while the divorce process was ongoing. Jessica then sent text messages filled with accusations, now targeting everyone who knew Meredith. She managed to find information about the family and friends of Meredith, copying the messages to everyone, then telling them how Meredith had stolen her husband, destroyed her family, and was now trying to take the children. Jessica obtained the phone numbers of at least 5 friends of family members on social media. It seems she was immersed in this all day, displaying behavior that resembled madness. She even personally called several people, relaying her story over her mobile phone. Some of Jessica's acquaintances became disappointed in her decency, causing real damage to her reputation. Benjamin also received even more terrifying messages. Jessica openly accused and intimidated him, stating that he would not receive anything, he would not gain access to Meredith and the children. Jessica wrote that because of his actions, he would have no chance of getting any of it, as she would not allow him to enjoy life after what he had done. Benjamin was extremely worried about this information and began to send Jessica message after message, trying to understand what she meant. However, she simply ignored all his questions, which only increased Benjamin's anxiety. He expressed his willingness to go to court for an emergency hearing regarding joint custody of the children, even threatened to try to take the children from her if she did not calm down. Finally, Jessica responded with a short message, "Your life will soon be better." Benjamin was sure that she was just mocking him and enjoying this situation. Jessica claimed that it was the last day she would experience pain, after which she ignored any attempts by Benjamin to contact her. On the morning of July 13, 2017, Jessica wrote to Benjamin again. She offered to meet so that Benjamin could answer some questions. However, Benjamin found everything very suspicious and hesitated to attend the meeting. He didn't suspect that this could turn out to be a fatal mistake. Benjamin tried to get her to talk on the phone to understand what she needed and why they couldn't discuss it without a meeting, but this only made Jessica even angrier. At 4:41 p.m., he received another message in which Jessica complained that she was tired of this bullying that never meant anything to Benjamin. In reality, old accusations and the most frightening threats she had ever voiced since the breakup emerged. Jessica's behavior was so alarming that Benjamin contacted her mother to discuss the situation, suspecting that Jessica was having a breakdown. He feared she could not control herself, might pose a danger to herself and the children. At that time, he was at work and could not leave. He did not suspect that while he was talking to Jessica's mother, Jessica was already driving to his apartment with bad intentions. At about 5 p.m., Jessica parked her car near the complex where Benjamin and Meredith lived. In the parking lot, Jessica saw Meredith, who had just returned from work and was sitting in her car, distracted by the mail on her mobile phone. Jessica approached her, pointed a gun, and shot through the glass, instantly killing her rival, whom she considered the cause of all her troubles. All this happened in broad daylight. As people were returning from work, the noise attracted numerous witnesses. After the incident, people saw Jessica get into her car and drive away. Neighbors contacted the police, reporting this and clarifying one frightening detail. At that time, there were 2 children in the car with the shooter. Witnesses described the shooter, and the police understood who they were talking about. They assumed that Benjamin was in danger. Jessica had enough time to act, but she was not going to go to Benjamin's workplace. Instead, she devised something much more sophisticated and stayed one step ahead of law enforcement. While the authorities were still looking for her in the city and were awaiting Benjamin's arrival at work, Jessica called Benjamin, told him that everyone he loved had left and that she would be next. Then Jessica hung up. It was the last call she made. Police eventually traced the call and went to Easley, 7 miles from the Benjamin home, where they saw her Jeep. The doors of the car were locked from the inside, and the engine was still running. Inside, they found 3 bodies, 2 children and Jessica herself, who was 36 years old. Jessica had persistently called Benjamin in hopes of meeting with him, perhaps intending him to be her first victim. However, he seemed to sense danger and avoided contact as much as possible, often opting to respond via a message on a messaging app. When she received a refusal, she flared up in anger and attacked Meredith, after which Jessica returned home. Near her house, she called Benjamin again. After a meaningless conversation, Jessica first attacked her 5-year-old daughter, then her 9-year-old son, after which she turned the gun on herself. Jessica used the same gun that she had borrowed from her parents on July 11th. During the investigation, detectives found out that Benjamin had been trying to obtain a restraining order against Jessica. He had filed for joint custody on the same day and had communicated with the police officer who came to check on the children. Jessica left 4 suicide notes, one for her mother, one for her father, one for her son's father, and one for her husband. In these notes, she expressed her love for her family and her regret for the pain her actions would cause them. Jessica insisted that she could no longer live with these feelings and believed that her children would also suffer without her, so she decided to take not only her life but theirs as well. In the letter to her son's father, she expressed gratitude for giving her her first child and apologized for the pain she had caused. Considering the content of these notes, the police investigated suspicions of domestic violence against the children. Judging by what Jessica wrote, it was possible she had harmed them as a way of exacting revenge on her unfaithful husband. However, nothing like this could be confirmed. As for the last note left by Jessica to Benjamin, it contained several short phrases in which she wished that Benjamin would experience the pain from his cruel act for the rest of his life. The note also stated that he would not be able to hurt them anymore. Among all the individuals involved in this case, Benjamin was the only survivor. The note turned out to be prophetic. Even to this day, he continues to live with the pain of losing his loved ones. Welcome back, detectives. Let's dive into another horrible case. The case of Sophie Toscan du Plantier. Sophie Bouniel was born on July 28, 1957, in Paris, France. She grew up in a renowned and wealthy family, with significant influence in the fashion and film industries. Sophie was artistic, talented, and assertive, which led her to a successful career as a film producer, making her a recognizable face and a symbol of success in the country. However, Sophie still prioritized her personal life and family happiness. In 1991, she married film producer Daniel Toscan du Plantier, and since then, she has been known as Sophie Toscan du Plantier. Their meeting was serendipitous, as both were entrenched in the film industry and matched each other's stature. They became symbols of luxury and wealth during that period, and their marriage attracted significant attention from the media. As both continued to thrive in their careers, they moved into a lavish mansion with Sophie's son from her first marriage. Sophie is a strong and energetic person, capable of resolutely defending her beliefs and continuously pursuing her dreams. Those close to her know that she is also a gentle, kind, and loving mother. The focus of her life was her son, Pierre-Louis Baudy. Furthermore, Sophie takes care of her image as a glamorous and fashionable woman, often attracting the attention of the media and reporters in the entertainment industry. As Sophie aged, she began to desire greater privacy, tranquility, and a family life away from the relentless scrutiny of admirers and strangers. In the early 90s, she started spending more time at her home in the rural area of Dunmanus West, near Cork, Ireland, a place she had enjoyed visiting as a child. Cork had become a popular retreat for affluent artists and writers drawn to its picturesque scenery. The hustle and bustle of Paris made her feel tired, so she decided to choose to live in this quiet and cozy place. In 1993, she purchased a cottage there. Unlike the villas she was accustomed to, this cottage posed some challenges, as it was in a remote area that was not always easy to access. However, for Sophie, the seclusion and peace it promised made it worth it. Even after she arrived, she faced issues with electricity and heating, which were often unreliable. Despite these difficulties, they did not significantly impact her ability to relax. Sophie was drawn to the local landscapes and the charm of the province because they helped her restore her emotional strength and inspired fond memories of her carefree childhood. After a long time away, she returned and was captivated by the beauty of nature, feeling as if she had fallen in love with it all over again. From then on, she chose to focus on the positives and disregard any inconveniences. Sophie typically spent her summers there but always returned to Paris, where she viewed this time as a period of spiritual and emotional renewal. Sophie usually goes there alone. The same thing happened in December 1996, when she was 39 years old, and she decided to visit Ireland to rejuvenate herself and read movie scripts before the new year. Arriving alone, she settled into her home in a quiet neighborhood. While she enjoyed her solitude, she wasn't a recluse. She interacted with her neighbors and childhood friends living nearby, was often seen around town. Sophie had established friendly relationships with many locals and always treated them as equals. Because of this, people didn't see her as just a woman from Bohemian Paris but rather as the familiar girl they remembered from their hometown. She engaged in pleasant conversations, deliberately steering clear of work and personal topics to avoid drawing attention and gossip. Before Christmas, a neighbor visited Sophie at her home. On December 23, 1996, around 10 a.m., she intended to chat about holiday plans and enjoy a cup of tea. However, instead of a friendly visit, she discovered a lifeless woman lying in the mud in front of the house. Alarmed, she immediately called the police to report a body near Sophie's residence. The condition of the body was so severe that she wasn't even sure it was Sophie. When the Irish police arrived, they encountered a gruesome scene. The woman's head was so badly damaged that she was unrecognizable, but she was confirmed to be Sophie Toscan du Plantier. At the time of her death, she was still wearing her nightgown and had on boots. The bedding in her bedroom was disheveled, suggesting that she had been awakened suddenly during the night or early morning and hurried outside, putting on her street shoes in the process. Nearby, authorities discovered a large concrete block covered in blood, which is believed to be the murder weapon. Bloody footprints led away from the scene towards the front gate, where the keys were still in the lock. Inside the house, 2 wine glasses were found in the dish drainer, leading detectives to speculate that the attack likely occurred outdoors, as there were no signs of a struggle indoors. Local police were not accustomed to dealing with such severe crimes in the area. The local precinct was small and lacked experienced investigators, so they had to wait for forensic experts from a larger city to arrive. These experts needed to thoroughly examine the crime scene in Sophie's body. They arrived just 1 day later, but during that time, Sophie's body remained at the outdoor scene. The weather was rainy and cold, and they could only cover her with plastic bags. Unfortunately, the damp conditions ruined some critical evidence. Once the investigation officially began, the police quickly noticed signs of a struggle on Sophie's hands. However, the passage of time made it difficult to evaluate these signs accurately. Most of the blood had been washed away by the rain, leaving investigators with very little evidence to work with. Forensic experts were engaged in reconstructing the incident that led to Sophie's death. It became clear that she died from blunt force trauma to the head. Some faint traces of blood were discovered on the gate and the entrance, but much of it had also been compromised by rain. Since Sophie was wearing boots and the blood was primarily found on the street side, investigators believed the attack likely began there. No signs of a struggle were found inside the house, and although 2 glasses of wine were found in the dish drainer, they could not be considered reliable evidence since they were already clean. It was uncertain when those glasses were used, as Sophie may have used them at different times by herself. Several DNA samples were collected from the crime scene, but in 1996, testing and profile comparison technology was very limited. This crucial evidence did not lead to any useful information, however, it was preserved in the archives. Detectives attempted to piece together the timeline of Sophie's activities since her arrival in Ireland. They discovered that she had arrived on December 21st. That same day, she was seen shopping at a grocery store, appearing relaxed while casually exploring the area. Sophie engaged in friendly conversations with several locals who were familiar with her. One store owner recalled that a man in a black coat and hat entered the store shortly after Sophie. Witnesses noted that this man appeared to be watching her and left as soon as she did, suggesting he might have been following her. It was obvious to those who were present that he showed no interest in shopping, as he didn't buy anything. No one else seemed to notice this suspicious individual on December 21st. On December 22nd, Sophie went for a walk along a path leading to a nearby castle perched on a rocky ledge. She took in the views from the observation deck before walking back to the city. She stopped by a local pub, where she ordered tea and chatted with some regular patrons. Eventually, Sophie returned to her home and did not go out again until late at night when she contacted her husband, Daniel, who was in Paris. This information helped investigators establish the timeline of the incident. Sophie's body was discovered at 10 a.m. the following morning, suggesting the attack occurred sometime between midnight and that time. Given the nature of the crime, investigators believed the killer was likely someone from Sophie's close circle, as is often the case in similar situations. The first suspect was Sophie's husband, Daniel. There were whispers that their marriage was struggling. As the police delved deeper into their family dynamics, they uncovered that the strain was due to Daniel's ongoing infidelity. Sophie had expressed her desire to end the relationship even before her trip to Ireland, viewing the getaway as a chance to relieve stress before the separation. Since both individuals were prominent and wealthy, the divorce would likely have been complex and highly publicized. Financial motivations can often lead to violent acts. However, Daniel was quickly cleared as a suspect when he claimed he was in France at the time of the murder, a claim corroborated by numerous witnesses, providing him with a solid alibi. The situation was further complicated by the fact that the murder occurred in a town with an insufficient police force, leaving them lacking the resources needed for a thorough investigation. This resulted in delays while they sifted through various theories and false claims. At this point, investigators considered the possibility that the murderer was familiar with both the victim, Sophie, and the local area, as the crime was committed without attracting attention. This explained the absence of outcry during the incident, even from neighborhood dogs, who would have recognized the perpetrator's scent but may not have reacted. Subsequently, detectives focused their attention on a man named Ian Kenneth Bailey. Ian was born in Manchester in 1957 and had a troubled past, as well as a troubled reputation. He started his career as a freelance journalist, owned a business, and held various jobs before moving to Ireland in 1991. At the time of the murder, Ian was living with his girlfriend and had experienced run-ins with local law enforcement. In 1991, Ian started a business but soon faced serious issues. He became involved in several troubling incidents after assaulting his business partner. Conflicts with authorities resulted in his conviction for assault later that year, and he spent some time in jail. Ian had a history with local police due to his temper and aggressive behavior, including previous domestic violence incidents that even led to his partner being hospitalized, although he was not jailed for those cases. Ian underwent a psychiatric evaluation, which revealed he had a narcissistic personality disorder. He was noted to be impulsive and cruel, with indications of various mental health issues. Experts described him as someone with very high self-esteem and a problem with alcohol, contributing to his unpredictable and violent outbursts. He claimed that his behavior was partly due to a difficult divorce that had occurred shortly before he moved to West Cork. There were additional reasons to consider him a suspect. His house was close to Sophie's, making it easy for him to approach her without being noticed. At that time, Ian was living with his girlfriend, Catherine Jules Thomas, who was also a local resident. Remarkably, on December 23rd, shortly after Sophie's body was discovered, they were among the first to arrive at the crime scene and possessed knowledge of many details about the crime. Catherine and Ian attempted to gather more information from the police to create a report. Ian claimed to be an independent journalist looking for a story, but he was denied access to the crime scene. The police noted that they were very insistent, even entering the house without permission. Upon checking his background, it became clear that he had a criminal history, raising doubts about his true identity as a reporter. Despite the police's objections, Ian managed to publish several negative articles. His aggressive pursuit of information only deepened the police's suspicions about him. The articles were filled with inappropriate details and speculation about Sophie's personal life, shocking her relatives with their lack of ethics and Ian's cynicism. Following the publication of these articles, a wave of public outrage ensued. Sophie's relatives publicly rejected Ian's claims by appearing on television. They believed that he was trying to tarnish Sophie's name for the sake of fame and profit. They agreed with law enforcement that Ian might be involved and regarded him with skepticism. When questioned by the police, Ian denied ever knowing Sophie. However, close friends of Sophie, who had known her since childhood, were convinced that Ian was connected to the crime. The media contributed to this belief by suggesting that Ian was involved in her death. Despite this, Ian maintained his innocence, citing his notes and a mysterious informant who allegedly provided him with crucial information, although he refused to reveal this person's identity. In Ian's writings, he not only focused on Sophie but also on a criminal within her circle of friends, who had hired a hitman. He suspected that this individual could be one of Sophie's ex-lovers or even her husband, who was in the process of divorcing her. While they were busy disputing these claims, a significant anonymous tip came in from a local resident. The witness reported seeing an unknown man near Sophie's house around 3 a.m. on December 23rd. The description of this man matched the appearance of a man that a local shop owner had seen chasing Sophie. Strangely, this anonymous witness provided a detailed and accurate description that matched Ian Kenneth Bailey's appearance exactly. A few days later, he was arrested and taken to the police station for questioning. Once there, he acted very nervously, created a scene, and made threats regarding the situation. Detectives quickly noticed suspicious scratches on his face and hands. When questioned about them, he claimed that he had been hurt by a Christmas tree that fell while he was cutting it down in the forest. Police were skeptical of Ian's explanation and took photos of the scratches, which only made him more agitated. Although his behavior seemed overly aggressive, he attributed it to his mental health issues. He denied knowing Sophie and insisted on his own theory, suggesting that one of her former partners might have hired someone to kill her. He loudly claimed that it was Daniel, not him, who should be investigated. Authorities believed that the criminal was a local who knew the area well, which explained how he could get to Sophie's house without leaving any evidence. Ian argued that the forensic team took too long to arrive at the crime scene, allowing rain to wash away any potential evidence, and insisted that being a local was irrelevant. He criticized the initial investigation as negligent and accused the police of attempting to pin the blame on him. Detectives interviewed Ian's friends, who reported seeing him at a local pub the night before the crime. Ian had no scratches on his face, making it improbable that he ventured into the forest at night to retrieve a Christmas tree after leaving the bar. Despite numerous objections, he was arrested on February 10, 1997, after new information emerged. Another key witness, Ian's ex-wife Jules Thomas, provided a statement. She was very concerned about potential charges from the police, which prompted her to speak up. She confirmed that she indeed met Sophie in the store on December 21, 1996. Ian learned about Sophie's arrival and went to find her to get a story. Jules also suggested that he might have followed Sophie to an observation deck on the 22nd, where she went to admire the castle. On that same day, when Ian returned, he acted very mysteriously and strangely, even commenting that something terrible might happen in the city that night. He never clarified what had made him anxious. Later that evening, Ian went out for a walk, but when he returned, he left again, only to come back an hour later. He assumed Jules was asleep, but she woke up several times throughout the night and did not find him at home. Finally, Ian confessed that he had gone to the nearby studio to work until 9 a.m. The inconsistencies in his statements and Jules's admissions led to his detention. However, within 12 hours, no solid evidence was found linking him to the murder. Under Irish law, if there is insufficient evidence to convict a suspect within 12 hours of arrest, the suspect must be released. As a result, he was released due to insufficient evidence. Despite being a prime suspect, law enforcement had no choice but to let him go. However, public suspicion towards him increased. Ian's behavior became increasingly erratic, which he attributed to mental health issues. The stress of being implicated as a possible murderer took a toll on his well-being, and he began experiencing hallucinations. He also tried to blame the police for defaming him, but his efforts were unsuccessful. The rumors he spread began to sound nonsensical. On January 27, 1998, they decided to arrest Ian again. He maintained his innocence and argued that the police had no evidence against him. Detectives pointed to the only DNA evidence found at the crime scene, which did not belong to Sophie. However, it was of poor quality due to contamination from prolonged exposure to the elements. This made it impossible to definitively link Ian to the murder, creating a significant hurdle for the investigation. Under Irish law, an individual can only be arrested twice without being charged for a crime. Ian maintained his innocence throughout the process. During his second arrest, authorities had just 12 hours to establish his involvement in the murder. He felt pressure to confess, which only fueled his anger. He sought to leverage his connections in journalism to discredit the local police, claiming that authorities were attempting to make him a scapegoat. Detectives believed Ian was simply aware of his legal rights and was stalling. Despite public suspicion of his guilt, he attributed his unusual interest in the case to his work as a journalist, stating that he was only pursuing a sensational story. This explained his presence while Sophie was alive. The police could not find any evidence against him, and he was released, leading to a standstill in the investigation. In 2003, Ian sued several news organizations for libel, as his connection to the murder had never been established. He sought to clear his name through legal action against the media. During the trial, multiple witnesses testified against him, claiming to have seen him on the day of Sophie's death. The most significant testimony came from an anonymous witness who reported seeing Ian near Sophie's house at night and accused him of lying. Jules Thomas, speaking for the prosecution, described Ian as rude and unstable, suggesting that he might be capable of violence. Nevertheless, the Irish authorities maintained that they lacked sufficient evidence to charge him. No conclusive evidence was found, and the DNA samples collected could not be fully analyzed, leaving officials constrained by the law. Sophie's family was deeply disappointed by the lack of progress in the investigation into her death. Relatives, including her husband, viewed the police's response as inadequate. In 2008, the family sought justice by appealing to the French court for an investigation but faced numerous obstacles. The key witness in the case later revealed that he had falsely accused journalist Ian out of fear of the police. After this revelation, Ian decided to take legal action against the Irish government for wrongful prosecution. His lawyer based their strategy on the witness's retraction of his statement. However, in 2019, a court in France began the trial without Ian's participation. Under French law, if a French citizen is killed abroad, the trial can take place in France. About 30 witnesses were summoned to testify. As a result of the proceedings, the court convicted Ian Kenneth Bailey of murder and sentenced him to 25 years in prison. However, the Irish Supreme Court refused to extradite him, arguing that the court's decision was flawed due to a lack of sufficient evidence. Consequently, Ian remained in Ireland, avoiding extradition and any legal consequences there. In 2022, a significant development occurred when the Irish and French judicial systems collaborated to investigate Sophie's murder. They reviewed all the case materials and re-examined the evidence, despite some being lost or damaged. There were suggestions that an accomplice of Daniel might have been involved, and Ian's account could have shed light on the truth. Unfortunately, Ian Kenneth Bailey passed away from cardiac arrest in January 2024 before he could learn the outcome of the investigation. The police searched his apartment, hoping to gather DNA samples for comparison with evidence collected during the original investigation in the 1990s. With advancements in DNA profiling and analysis, there was a renewed opportunity to uncover the truth about what happened. Nearly 30 years had passed since Sophie's death, and there was finally hope for answers. However, none had emerged yet. Joshua Powell was born on January 20, 1976, in Puyallup, Washington, to Stephen and Terica Powell. He had 4 siblings, Michael, John, Jennifer, and Alina. However, life in the Powell family was far from normal. Their father, Stephen, was controlling and inappropriate, fostering a toxic atmosphere for his children. He shared adult material with his sons and set no boundaries, exposing them to adult content that influenced their behavior. As a teenager, Joshua acted out violently. He once killed his sister's pet gerbil in a fit of anger. He also threatened his mother with a knife during an argument, and when he felt desperate, he threatened to harm himself. In 2000, Joshua met Susan Cox at a church dinner. She was kind, hardworking, and full of life, and they got married within a year. Unbeknownst to Susan, her marriage would encounter serious challenges. Initially, they lived with Joshua's father, Stephen, in Washington, and that was when things became really disturbing. Stephen began to obsess over Susan. He watched her with a camera, used a small mirror to look into the bathroom, stole her underwear from the washing machine, read her diary, and posted love songs online under a pseudonym. Finally, one day, he confessed his feelings to Susan. This conversation, which included Susan's panicked rejection, was accidentally recorded on his own camera. It became the final straw. Joshua and Susan decided to pack up and move to Utah, hoping to forget about Stephen. For a while, life seemed to stabilize for Joshua and Susan, who had 2 sons named Charlie and Braden. They relocated to West Valley City, Utah, in search of a fresh start. However, Susan felt increasingly suffocated in her marriage. Her friends noticed her unhappiness and learned that Joshua hardly showed her any affection, creating a sense of distance between them. By the summer of 2008, their situation had deteriorated significantly. Joshua and Susan argued constantly, even in front of their children. Joshua had become extremely controlling, making all the decisions and leaving Susan feeling trapped. Their marriage was not just struggling, it was falling apart. He took complete control of their finances, forcing Susan to rely on him for even minor expenses. He reduced their grocery budget, refused to buy her new clothes, and required her to justify every dollar she spent. While he guarded their bank accounts, he had no issue spending money on himself, wasting thousands while Susan struggled to afford basic necessities. The issue extended to their vehicles as well. Although they owned 2 cars, Joshua claimed the family car as his own. Instead of allowing Susan to drive to work, he made her ride a bike, regardless of the weather or her fatigue. Moreover, he started to distance himself from their shared faith. Although they had been active members of the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints, Joshua began refusing to attend services with Susan and their sons. He mocked her beliefs, made excuses to avoid church, and discouraged her involvement. The most painful betrayal came when Joshua refused to sever ties with his father, Stephen, despite Susan's insistence that he was dangerous and unwelcome in their lives. Joshua ignored her concerns, continued to communicate with his father, and allowed their young children to maintain contact with him. By 2007, Joshua had accumulated over $200,000 in debt, adding to their marital strain as Susan recognized that their situation was worsening. In response, she began documenting everything. In 2008, Susan created a video documenting the damage in her home, which she attributed to Joshua. That same year, she wrote a secret will ominously stating that if she were to die, it might not be an accident, even if it appeared to be one. Just a year later, she disappeared without a trace. On December 6, 2009, everything seemed normal. That morning, Susan, Charlie, and Braden went to church as usual. Susan interacted with friends and tended to her boys, and nothing appeared out of the ordinary. After church, a neighbor visited the family and spent some time with them before leaving. No one could have predicted that this would be the last time anyone would see Susan. The following morning, December 7th, something felt off. Susan didn't show up for work and hadn't called in sick or requested a day off. At the same time, the boys' nanny noticed that Joshua hadn't dropped them off, which was unusual for him. Concerned, she tried to contact the family, but no one answered. As hours went by without any word from Susan or Joshua, worry turned to fear. Joshua's mother, Terica, and his sister, Jennifer, learned about the situation and rushed to the house. When they arrived, they found the doors locked, the curtains drawn, and no one inside. The unsettling silence heightened their anxiety. They knocked and called out, but received no response. In a state of panic, they called the police. Officers arrived and forced entry into the home, fearing that the family might have been victims of carbon monoxide poisoning or faced another emergency. What the officers discovered inside the house was deeply concerning. Although the house was empty, something felt wrong. Susan's purse, wallet, and identification were still there, untouched. Her cell phone was later found in the family's only car, a Chrysler Town & Country minivan that Joshua had been using. It was turned off. There were no signs of a struggle, but one detail stood out. 2 box fans were set up in the living room, blowing air directly onto a damp spot on the couch. This unusual detail felt unsettling. Hours later, around 5 p.m., Joshua returned home with his sons, Charlie and Braden. The police quickly brought him in for questioning. His explanation was strange. He claimed that after midnight on December 7th, he took his 2 young sons, ages 4 and 2, on a spontaneous camping trip to the Pony Express Trail in western Utah, a remote area characterized by snow and freezing temperatures. He mentioned that Susan stayed home to sleep. His story raised many questions. Who would take toddlers on an impromptu camping trip in sub-freezing weather in the middle of the night, especially when they had work and daycare to prepare for in just a few hours? Police found it suspicious that Joshua had not notified his boss about not coming to work that day. When asked why, he gave a puzzling answer. He claimed he had lost track of the days and thought it was Sunday instead of Monday. Investigators aimed to confirm his story by sending a team to the area where he claimed to have camped. However, they found no evidence to support his claim. No tire tracks in the snow, no footprints, no fire pit, nothing. It was as if he had never gone on that trip. Things took an even stranger turn. On December 8th, after a second police interview, Joshua suddenly rented a car from Salt Lake City International Airport and then disappeared for nearly 18 hours. His whereabouts during that time remain unknown. When he finally reappeared, he called his mother from Interstate 84 in Tremonton, Utah, sounding disoriented and giving vague answers about his location. Later, he told his sister Jennifer that he had been driving around the city aimlessly, randomly getting on and off different freeways. When police examined the rental car, they found that he had added 87 miles to the odometer. Where did he go? What was he doing? No one knows, but it was becoming increasingly evident that Joshua was concealing something. 2 days after Susan went missing, the police conducted another search of her home. This time, they found something concerning on the floor, traces of Susan's blood. While it wasn't a large amount, it was enough to raise serious questions. Inside the house, they also discovered life insurance policies totaling $1.5 million and a handwritten letter from Susan. In the letter, she expressed her growing fear for her life and mentioned being terrified of Joshua. Years later, DNA tests confirmed that one blood sample belonged to Susan, while another matched an unknown male, whose identity remains unknown. As the police investigated Joshua's actions following Susan's disappearance, his behavior appeared increasingly suspicious. He emptied her retirement accounts, canceled her chiropractic appointments, and withdrew his sons from daycare, all within days of her vanishing. It seemed he was trying to erase her from their lives. Additionally, Joshua had previously talked to co-workers about how to dispose of a body in an abandoned mine shaft. At the time, people dismissed it as a strange comment, but now, it seemed more significant. As investigators worked to understand what happened to Susan, they questioned the only other witnesses present with Joshua that night, his sons. 4-year-old Charlie was interviewed, and surprisingly, he confirmed that the camping trip took place. However, his account included a significant twist. He claimed that their mother was with them. According to Charlie, Susan was in the car that night but never returned home. Weeks later, a teacher overheard Charlie make a chilling remark, stating that his mother was dead, without any details or explanations, suggesting he had come to accept this reality. Additionally, Susan's parents, Chuck and Judy Cox, reported a troubling incident. At daycare, Charlie's younger brother, Braden, drew a picture of a van. When asked about it, Braden pointed to the back of the van and said, "Mommy was in the trunk." This raised further suspicions for the police, who were becoming increasingly convinced that Joshua was aware of what had happened to Susan. They intended to bring Joshua in for further questioning and requested all footage of his interviews with local news outlets. However, Joshua showed no willingness to cooperate. On December 14th, he obtained legal representation. In the following days, he became more distant and less responsive to the authorities. Just before Christmas, he gathered his sons and left Utah, returning to Puyallup, Washington, to live with his father, Stephen Powell. By December 24th, police identified him as a person of interest in the case. Sadly, the situation was far from resolved. In 2010, Joshua moved into his father's house in Puyallup, bringing his two young sons, Charlie and Braden. Joshua made it clear he wasn't returning to Utah, announcing plans to rent out their home in West Valley City. Some reports indicated he left due to losing his job, but those who knew him felt he was fleeing from something. Shortly after settling in Washington, a website called SusanPowell.org emerged. It claimed to be the official site for Susan Powell, but instead of helping to find her, it focused on defending Joshua. The site accused Susan's family, including her sister Jennifer Graves, and even the LDS Church of conducting a smear campaign against him. Some posts went so far as to suggest that Susan had fled to Brazil with another missing person, journalist Stephen Kocher, a completely unfounded theory. It didn't take long for people to suspect that Joshua and his father, Stephen, were behind the website. Then, by late 2010, the Powells made a startling claim. They suggested that Susan had been mentally ill and had intentionally abandoned her family. This seemed like a desperate attempt to change the narrative, but Susan's parents quickly rebutted it. There was no evidence to support the idea that Susan left on her own or that she was mentally unstable. While Joshua tried to portray himself as the victim, the police began focusing on his father, Stephen. A family friend revealed that Stephen had been obsessed with Susan for years. When investigators examined Stephen's computers, they discovered 4,500 images of Susan, many taken without her consent. These were not just ordinary photographs, they included disturbing close-ups of her body. Police began investigating Joshua's brother, Michael Powell, after he displayed suspicious behavior. Shortly after Susan went missing, he sold his broken Ford Taurus to a junkyard in Pendleton, Oregon. This raised eyebrows, especially when he later requested satellite images of the lot, seemingly to monitor the car. When authorities tracked it down, they used cadaver dogs, which indicated that human remains had once been in the trunk. Unfortunately, DNA tests did not yield conclusive results, leaving a key question in the case unanswered. In September 2011, police thought they had a significant lead. While searching Topaz Mountain in Utah, a location frequently visited by Joshua, they discovered what looked like a grave site. The ground appeared to have been recently disturbed and showed signs of digging. Investigators spent several days examining the area, but ultimately found no remains. Meanwhile, tensions between the Joshua families and the Susan families escalated. After police searched Stephen's home, both he and Joshua took to the media to advocate for their side of the story. Stephen claimed that he and Susan were developing a romantic relationship before her disappearance, using old journal entries from her teenage years to argue that she had always been unstable. A judge did not accept this narrative. He ruled that Stephen and Joshua could not publish any of Susan's personal writings and ordered them to return or destroy any journals they had already made public. Then the situation escalated. On September 22, the police arrested Stephen on charges of voyeurism and child abuse. Investigators found secretly recorded videos in his home featuring young girls, adult women, and, most alarmingly, Susan. It was apparent that Stephen posed a serious danger, and authorities began to suspect that Joshua might not be innocent either. John Long, Washington's Assistant Attorney General, announced that Joshua was now part of the investigation. The day after Stephen's arrest, Susan's father, Chuck Cox, filed for custody of his grandchildren, Charlie and Braden. Initially, the court granted him only temporary custody, allowing Joshua the opportunity to regain custody if he moved out of Stephen's home. Joshua rented a house in South Hill, Washington, presenting it as if he were complying with the order. However, authorities later claimed he never actually lived there. By this time, Joshua's sister, Jennifer, publicly expressed her belief that he was involved in Susan's disappearance. As the custody battle escalated, the court ordered Joshua to undergo psychological evaluations. A forensic psychologist, James Manley, evaluated Joshua and discovered concerning patterns. Joshua denied having any normal human flaws or weaknesses and displayed highly controlling behavior toward his sons. He also exhibited signs of deep paranoia, frequently blaming the police and media for his difficulties. Despite these findings, there was no direct evidence of abuse. Therefore, Manley allowed Joshua to visit his sons several times a week under the supervision of a social worker. However, in January 2012, everything changed. When examining computers seized from Joshua's home, police found about 400 images of child abuse, bestiality, and incest. The images had been cached from a previous owner, but Joshua had viewed them. Although they weren't illegal, the psychologist handling his case was deeply concerned. Joshua was ordered to undergo a full psychological evaluation and a polygraph test. As the pressure mounts, Joshua becomes desperate and is about to commit a horrific act that no one could have imagined. On February 5, 2012, social worker Elizabeth Griffin Hall pulled up to Joshua's house in South Hill, Washington, for what was supposed to be a routine supervised visit between him and his two young boys, Charlie and Braden. The court had ordered these visits to be monitored for the children's safety, so Hall was there to ensure everything went smoothly. However, the moment she arrived, something felt off. As soon as the boys reached the front door, Joshua yanked them inside and slammed it shut right in Hall's face. She barely had time to react before she heard the deadbolt click. She pounded on the door, shouting for him to open it, but he didn't respond. Panicked, she pulled out her phone and called 911. Her voice shook as she told the dispatcher what had just happened, that she was supposed to be supervising the visit, that Joshua had locked her out, and that she feared for the boys' safety. She begged them to send help quickly. Immediately afterwards, a terrible explosion occurred, shaking the house. The force of the explosion propelled Hall backward. Within seconds, flames erupted, engulfing the home in thick black smoke. The intense heat scorched the air around her, leaving her immobilized by fear. Neighbors rushed over, some shouting and others already calling emergency services, but it was too late. The fire spread rapidly, and there was no chance for anyone inside to escape alive. Investigators later confirmed their initial suspicions. Joshua had planned this act. It wasn't an accident or a tragic gas leak. He had doused the house in gasoline, turning it into a death trap. Officially, Charlie and Braden died from carbon monoxide poisoning, but the reality was more horrific. Joshua had attacked them with a hatchet before starting the fire. The day before the tragedy, he emptied his bank account, donated the boys' toys to charity, and sent cold, emotionless goodbye emails to family and friends. Charlie and Braden were buried beside their mother, whom they would never see again, but their family's struggle continued. A year after Joshua took the lives of his two young sons and himself, his brother Michael tragically followed suit. On February 11, 2013, he ended his own life. His ending his own life sparked even more suspicion. In 2012, police questioned him several times about his abandoned Ford Taurus, which was found at a wrecking yard in Oregon. When asked why he left it there, he was vague and did not provide clear answers. Investigators later indicated they believed both Joshua and Michael were involved in Susan's murder. Despite extensive searching, Susan's case remained unsolved and hopeless. By May 21, 2013, the West Valley City Police officially closed the investigation into her disappearance. In the same year, James Manley, the psychologist who assessed Joshua for the state of Washington, acknowledged that he had always suspected Joshua was connected to Susan's disappearance. However, he did not include these suspicions in his official report, as his role was to evaluate Joshua's parenting, not to investigate a crime. The legal dispute over Susan's estate continued for years. In March 2015, Susan's father, Chuck Cox, finally prevailed in a lengthy legal battle against Terica and Alina Powell, who had attempted to declare Susan legally dead in order to collect life insurance. As a result, Chuck gained full control of the estate. In 2019, a surprising revelation came to light. KSL, a radio station in Salt Lake City, reported on its detailed podcast about Susan's case, called Cold, that disturbing child abuse material found by West Valley City Police, which contributed to Joshua losing custody of his sons, did not actually belong to him. In fact, it wasn't even found on his computer. The explicit images were located on a second-hand computer that Susan had bought from fellow members of her LDS church. The previous owners had viewed the content, but by the time this information surfaced, it was too late to rectify the situation. The damage had already been done. In early 2022, there was one final attempt to locate Susan's remains. A team led by Dave Sparks, known from the TV show Diesel Brothers, searched a remote mine shaft in the Utah desert in hopes of bringing Susan home. They discovered rib bones, what looked like human vertebrae, and pieces of clothing, indicating that someone had died there. The remains were sent for DNA testing, but once again, there was no success. The bones did not belong to Susan, and they were not even human. A pair of pants found with the remains tested positive for male DNA, raising another question: to whom did they belong? More importantly, will Susan Powell ever be found? Hello, crime enthusiasts. Are you ready for another chilling investigation? The case of Jamie Stice. On April 12, 2011, in the small town of Morgantown, Kentucky, with a population of 2,500, 30-year-old Kathy Coy unexpectedly went into labor while driving. She had to give birth in her car on the side of the road, close to her home. Kathy had little time to call her friend, Shelley Lindsay, to inform her that she was about to give birth and needed help. When Shelley arrived, she was in the back seat of the car, covered in blood and holding her newborn. Sadly, the joy of becoming a mother was short-lived. Kathy noticed that the baby was having trouble breathing, so Shelley quickly called emergency services and drove them to the medical center. Kathy's hopes of motherhood were overshadowed by a grim situation. The doctors were very concerned. The baby's condition was critical. He was taken urgently to the intensive care unit due to breathing difficulties and a low body temperature, known as cold shock, which can be life-threatening. The doctors were not only worried about the newborn but also had concerns for Kathy and her family's emotional state during this crisis. The police arrived to investigate the situation. They went to the home where Kathy's children from a previous marriage lived with their grandmother. Officers spoke with the eldest daughter, 11-year-old Brianna, and her grandmother. The children expressed surprise at their mother's new baby, as they did not believe she was pregnant. They mentioned that she intended to meet with a friend who was also pregnant, but no one knew the friend's name. The situation seemed suspicious. Detectives accessed Kathy's social media account and identified a friend of hers, 21-year-old Jamie Stice, who was pregnant. The police attempted to reach Jamie but were unable to make contact. The detectives subsequently reached out to Jamie's mother, Jeannie. She informed them that her daughter was in the final stages of pregnancy and that she hadn't heard from Jamie since 9:30 that morning. Concerned, she was contemplating reporting her daughter as missing but realized that the police might not act quickly since not enough time had passed. While the investigation was ongoing, detectives spoke with Kathy again to clarify the timeline of the incident from that day. Kathy confirmed that she had given birth. She explained that she had woken up early, saw her husband Shannon off to work around 4:30 a.m., and then left to meet her friend Jamie around 10 a.m. After their meeting, as she was returning home, she began to feel contractions. Kathy stopped at a restaurant to grab a quick bite but felt the need to leave in a hurry. Realizing she wouldn't reach the hospital in time, she called her closest friend for assistance. Shelley, Kathy's friend, recounted that when she received the call for help, she rushed outside and saw Kathy in the back seat of a car. Kathy was not wearing pants, only a bloody shirt, and she held a baby in her arms, who was also covered in blood, as if he had just been born. Shelley noticed the placenta and recognized that her friend needed urgent help, especially since the baby was struggling to breathe. She quickly got into her car and drove to the medical center. Shelley observed that the baby was covered in grass and dirt but assumed he had fallen and gotten dirty in the car. There was no time to learn more. her priority was supporting the newborn. Both women's accounts were largely similar, with one key difference. Kathy claimed that Shelley delivered the baby, while Shelley denied this. The situation was chaotic, with Kathy in labor crying out, and both her and the baby's conditions creating confusion. While doctors worked to assist the baby, Kathy pleaded with them to save his life. There were concerns about whether the situation was staged, leading to the decision to take Kathy in for questioning at the station. At that time, Kathy had already been examined by doctors, and her condition seemed stable. However, when the police began questioning her about her friend Jamie on social media, her story started to change. Initially, she claimed that she had only briefly met Jamie before ending their friendship. Kathy explained that she had driven Jamie to the Social Security office, dropped her off near the building, and then Jamie had left in an unknown direction. At that point, Kathy began to experience contractions, which forced her to leave abruptly. This part of her story raised doubts. To support her new version, Kathy presented a message from Jamie, which allegedly asked her to pick Jamie up from the Social Security office, a request Kathy refused due to complications in their story. However, when detectives expressed their disbelief, Kathy's narrative shifted again. Now, Kathy stated that she had picked up Jamie and taken her home, but Jamie was so exhausted that she collapsed on the sofa. Kathy claimed her contractions only started after this encounter. The significant changes in her story seemed implausible, but she attributed them to the stress of the emergency situation. Detectives aimed to determine the truth about how Kathy and Jamie met. Jamie's mother, Jeannie, stated that they had known each other for only a couple of months after connecting through social media. Jamie is pregnant with a baby. When asked about Kathy's relationship with Jamie, Kathy claimed she had known Jamie for only a few weeks and had been introduced through a mutual friend while seeking help with housing issues. At this point, inconsistencies regarding their acquaintance and its purpose emerged. Kathy couldn't even name this mutual friend, even though Jamie was 20 weeks pregnant, aligning with her due date, which raised further suspicion. Kathy was later informed that something significant might have occurred around 10:30 a.m., right after their meeting. Jamie was missing, and detectives informed the parents that they could not reach out to her. They encouraged Kathy to assist in the search. At this point, they were already skeptical about whether the baby truly belonged to Kathy. Kathy's husband, Shannon, arrived at the station. He was thrilled that his wife had finally given birth, but was confused about why she was being held and questioned. Shannon informed the police that Kathy had experienced miscarriages in the past, which had led her to struggle with depression. Despite the challenges, she remained hopeful about becoming pregnant again and starting a family. He feared that if their efforts failed, their relationship might end. For a woman desperate to become a mother, the thought of losing her husband could push her to desperate actions, even to the point of harming another woman. It was possible that Kathy had pretended to be pregnant to keep her husband with her. Additionally, her friend Shelley, who took her to the hospital during labor, might have played a role in this situation. Kathy frequently visited Shelley and shared stories about her pregnancy, but it was unclear whether Shelley supported Kathy's deception, suspected her, or had unwittingly assisted in a crime. Shelley told the detectives that she had never faced such accusations before. However, during the investigation, it became clear that she was involved in several aspects of the deception. For instance, after Kathy returned from a gynecologist appointment where she learned she was not pregnant, Shelley pretended to be a nurse. Kathy feared that this news could push her husband to leave her, so she asked Shelley to call him, posing as a nurse who confirmed her pregnancy. Shelley claimed she had no idea that Kathy was pretending to be pregnant or plotting anything deceitful. She believed everything was genuine and was genuinely happy for her friend. Kathy managed to convince Shelley, using various excuses, that pregnancy came with complications and that Shelley's support could help save her marriage. Up until the end, Shelley truly believed that Kathy would soon give birth. However, not everyone shares the same perspective as Shelley. When the police spoke to Kathy's other friends and her husband's relatives, it became clear that there had been a lot of discussion about Kathy's situation over the past 6 months. Many people suspected that she had been deceitful. For example, her mother-in-law often tried to reach out to her, hoping to find out the truth. She believes that Kathy is merely trying to deceive everyone, especially Shannon, to bind him to herself. The mother-in-law was very frustrated with Kathy's behavior and discussed it with her son, Shannon. For a short time, he listened to her concerns. A lot of suspicion arose from the continuous delays in the expected due date. The situation dragged on for so long that it started to seem unrealistic, as Kathy herself had no clear idea of when she would give birth. Witnesses noted that over the past few months, her belly has sometimes appeared smaller and then larger. By late 2011, the mother-in-law was convinced that Kathy was lying and was simply afraid of losing Shannon. She managed to persuade her son by highlighting that his wife was clearly deceiving him. He began to demand proof of the pregnancy, which led to even more elaborate deceptions. To maintain the ruse, Kathy stole an ultrasound photo during a visit. This image helped convince her husband, but it was not the only tactic she used. After stealing the ultrasound photo, Shannon is overjoyed about his wife's pregnancy. However, if the truth were revealed, their relationship would be over. His mother insisted that her son had been deceived. In the face of growing doubts, Shannon demanded more proof. His wife was well prepared and even managed to show him a video of their baby's heartbeat, which she had downloaded from the internet. Shannon was repeatedly misled. His mother was disappointed but unaware of the depths of the deception. She simply didn't know Kathy well enough. As the due date approached, Kathy needed more than just a friend acting as a nurse, a video, and a stolen ultrasound photo. After Jamie's disappearance, the photo was used to convince the police and medical staff that Kathy had given birth to the boy. As they contemplated the situation, a troubling image formed in their minds of how Kathy could have acquired the baby and why his mother, Jamie, was missing. Meanwhile, Kathy was already in an interrogation room at the local police station. Despite being stubborn and refusing to admit anything, she continued to provide confused and conflicting testimony, changing her story with each new detail the police revealed. There was no longer any doubt about her dishonesty, but they needed a confession. It was time to employ some tactics. They decided to leave her in the interrogation room alone for a while. This clever move aimed to see how she would respond and what attempts she would make to extricate herself from the situation. The plan worked, but not in the way they had anticipated. Kathy suddenly grabbed her mobile phone and called an unfamiliar number, pretending to talk to Jamie. When the detectives returned, she mentioned it, but she still couldn't provide any information about Jamie. A check on the phone number revealed that she hadn't actually called Jamie at all. The detectives quickly confirmed that there was no doubt that the boy Kathy had brought to the hospital was Jamie's child. DNA testing confirmed this connection. Although the detectives continued to act confidently, Kathy began to waver in her story. Unfortunately, she still refused to acknowledge what had happened to Jamie. The police informed Kathy that witnesses had seen Jamie get into her car alone that morning, and no one saw her come back, contradicting Kathy's claims. They tried to determine where Kathy had taken Jamie. Why was she holding the baby? Doctors noted that the baby's breathing issues and hypothermia were not accidental. He had been born less than an hour before arriving at the medical center, and his airways were still filled with fluid. Kathy seemed overwhelmed and unsure of how to help him, which caused the baby's condition to worsen. Once these facts were revealed, Kathy presented a new version of her story. Kathy revealed that about 9 months before the current incident, she had visited the hospital and learned from the doctor that she had suffered another miscarriage. After leaving the clinic, she encountered a woman named Ashley, who suggested that she could buy a child for $550 that was expected to be born to Jamie, but insisted they would need to wait until the boy was born. Kathy agreed right away and paid, hoping this would help save her marriage. Afterward, she pretended to be pregnant to maintain the deception while waiting for the birth. On the day of the incident, Kathy claimed she took the child from Jamie and left, asserting that she did not harm him. Kathy's account sounded unbelievable. How could Ashley plan such a transaction, and how did she know 9 months in advance that Jamie would have a baby, especially a boy? Furthermore, Kathy could not provide any contact information or even a description of Ashley, making it clear that she was lying. The detectives quickly noticed her inconsistencies. Eventually, she admitted that the story about purchasing a baby was untrue, but she continued to claim that she took the baby from Jamie's home early in the morning, insisting that Jamie simply vanished after handing over the baby. Kathy did not explain how she ended up with a stranger's child in her arms, although it was evident that the child was Jamie's son. Investigators were quickly able to uncover Kathy's identity and found unsettling details about her. Her stepfather, Imran, reported witnessing her shocking behavior on several occasions. He described her as cruel, manipulative, and unpredictable, believing she was capable of committing terrible acts for her own enjoyment and benefit. Imran mentioned that Kathy had once confessed to him her potential to commit murder. Therefore, he was not surprised to see her in police custody, convinced that she could commit any crime and was indifferent to the pain she caused others. It became clear that Kathy was already known to law enforcement. Detectives found a police report accusing her of stalking a pregnant teacher with whom she worked. Their interactions at school were frequent, and Kathy's behavior had become so troubling that it frightened the teacher, who detailed several disturbing incidents. One particularly alarming moment occurred when the teacher was alone in her office and noticed Kathy silently watching her from the aisle. Remarkably, during the time the teacher was pregnant, Kathy also claimed that she was expecting a baby. Later, the teacher experienced a miscarriage, and shortly after that, Kathy's alleged pregnancy also ended. If these events had unfolded differently, that teacher might have become a victim instead of Jamie. The detectives were determined to extract a confession from Kathy. They were not going to let her leave but needed solid evidence first. There were crucial details that Kathy was not aware of. Despite her persistence, the investigators believed that Jamie was no longer alive. When Kathy and her friend Shelley arrived at the hospital with the child, the placenta was discovered. This raised serious concerns about the childbirth. Normally, placentas remain inside the mother after delivery, leading to suspicions that Kathy had attempted an untrained surgical procedure, similar to a cesarean section. The police interviewed doctors and hospital staff. Experts indicated that if a mother's heart stops, there is typically a window of no more than 5 minutes to save the baby. Kathy was likely aware of this urgency, which may have caused her to act carelessly and make several mistakes that could have endangered her child's life. Detectives believed that Jamie had bled out and died shortly after the brutal procedure began. During the questioning, Kathy began to show signs of distress but did not admit to murder. She continued to weave stories under the detectives' pressure, avoiding direct questions, and suggested that she needed to be placed in a psychiatric unit, implying she was mentally unstable. In response, the police shifted their approach. Instead of pressuring her further, they tried to soothe her, suggesting that her actions might have been accidental. Their goal was to gather any information they could. Kathy was the last person to see Jamie alive, so all suspicion fell on her. The police continued their investigation due to concerns that she might evade capture. The police questioned those closest to Kathy, but no one could confirm her story. However, detectives eventually gathered important information revealing Kathy's true nature. Her own children shared troubling insights about her. Just 2 weeks before Kathy showed up at the hospital with a baby, she had visited a flea market with her kids and purchased a powerful stun gun. The seller warned that this model could incapacitate an adult with direct contact. While testing it, Kathy approached a large stranger at the market and waved the stun gun in front of him. When he remained unfazed, she pressed it against his leg, causing him to collapse. Pleased with her actions, Kathy laughed and walked away. Under pressure from detectives, Kathy began to disclose unsettling details of her plan. She initially wanted to simulate giving birth as realistically as possible, even considering placing the fetus and placenta inside herself. When this proved too complicated, she devised an alternative. Arriving at a friend's house, she sat in the back seat, holding the baby while using cut-out female organs to create the illusion of having just given birth. Regardless, she still refused to reveal Jamie's whereabouts. Her family members confirmed her violent tendencies. In fact, Kathy's own mother was so afraid of her that she took Kathy's children from her first marriage and raised them herself. Shannon's relatives were horrified by Kathy's erratic behavior and urged him to end their relationship. After receiving partial recognition of her situation, Kathy began to elaborate on her belief that she had multiple personalities. She insisted that it was not her, but an alter ego named Lindsay, who approached her friend with the baby. This persona was used to shift the blame for everything that happened to Jamie, although Kathy avoided providing specific details. She frequently mentioned that she belonged in a mental hospital instead of prison. Kathy claimed that when her personality switched, she experienced blackouts and couldn't remember anything. She described instances where she could get into a car, lose touch with reality, and wake up in a completely different part of the city without knowing how she got there. Detectives, however, suspected that Kathy was lying. They discovered that she had previously discussed plans to kidnap another child with her relatives and had even sought her children's assistance. When they refused, she dismissed it as a joke. Kathy's mother recounted how her daughter had repeatedly urged her to help commit murder, but she flatly refused. People who knew Kathy well denied her claims of having a split personality, stating that she had never exhibited such issues before. During the interrogation, Kathy's second personality appeared very self-assured, insisting that no charges could stick to her. Kathy continued to assert that Jamie was alive, despite the severity of Jamie's injuries, which made survival impossible. This bravado quickly faded when Kathy learned she was being accused of murder. After her arrest, Kathy finally agreed to cooperate with the authorities, even leading them to the location of Jamie's body. It was then that the true extent of the crime emerged. Kathy's friendship with Jamie was greatly exaggerated. In reality, Jamie had been another victim of Kathy, who had been stalking her. Kathy had lured Jamie into meetings with gifts and promises of a job. She brought the police to a wooded area where Jamie's body was found, badly mutilated and lifeless, with signs of being shocked by a stun gun on her neck. This was the same stun gun that Kathy had purchased at a flea market with her children just 2 weeks prior to the crime. When Jamie's body was discovered, it was revealed that she had died from multiple stab wounds and excessive blood loss. Kathy had immobilized her with an electric shock gun and then performed a cesarean section in the forest. This is why the baby was found covered in grass and dirt when Kathy brought him to her friend's house. Kathy admitted that she hadn't researched adequately to prepare for such a dangerous procedure. She only looked online once and thought that was sufficient, which was clearly inadequate for someone without any medical training. Kathy, who was 40 years old, was charged with first-degree murder, as well as kidnapping both an adult and a baby. In court, she cried and pleaded guilty to the charges of kidnapping and murder. The baby she had taken from Jamie survived and was later named Isaiah Allen Stice Reynolds, honoring his late mother with his second surname. He was placed with his father. Kathy sent letters to her children explaining what had happened, but those letters contained many lies. She was found guilty and sentenced to life in prison without the possibility of parole. Her children were placed in a foster home, and her husband remarried, finding a stable partner. In interviews, Kathy's children stated that on the day of the crime, their mother appeared completely normal and was not anxious about the act she was committing. During the trial, Kathy's stepfather expressed his sorrow, not primarily for his relationship with Kathy, but because he was relieved that she could no longer harm anyone. He also felt deep remorse over Jamie's death, regretting that he hadn't reported Kathy to the police after she confessed her intention to kill, believing that doing so might have saved Jamie's life. The case of Jamie Stice is a chilling story of despair, deceit, and unspeakable acts of brutality. Set in the peaceful small town of Morgantown, Kentucky, this tragedy reveals the dark side of the desire to become a mother, leading Kathy Coy down an unforgivable path of crime. Jamie Stice, a young pregnant woman filled with hopes for the future, became a victim of manipulation and horrifying violence, leaving her son, Isaiah Allen Stice Reynolds, motherless from the moment he was born. Kathy was sentenced to life in prison without the possibility of parole and must pay for her sins. However, the pain she inflicted on Jamie's family and her own is irreparable. This case serves not only as a warning about the destructive power of deceit, but also raises questions about the boundary between love and obsession. Crime lovers, what do you think about this haunting ending? Leave your thoughts. Hello everyone, today we will learn about another case. The case of Mary Stauffer. Mary was born in West Duluth, Minnesota, USA, and her family moved to the neighboring town of Hummantown when she was 10 years old. She had 3 siblings, all of whom graduated from a local school and planned to go to college. Mary attended college and graduated in 1965. She loved working with children and dreamed of teaching, a dream that came true when she got a job at a school. She is a math teacher. In her personal life, everything was also successful. She married a seminary graduate, Irv Stauffer. They were devout Baptists. They first went to the Philippines as missionaries in 1967, and the trip was successful. Mary taught in Minneapolis for a couple of years. Then they moved to Polk, Nebraska, where her husband was asked to become the pastor of a congregation. They dedicated themselves to serving the church there, where both of their children were born. In 1975, they returned to the Philippines to undertake a 4-year mission trip. There, they planted new churches on the islands and returned home to Minnesota in 1979. Mary was planning to go to the Philippines again, this time intending to take her children with her. A few days before the family was to leave for the Philippines, while they were in the suburbs of St. Paul, they were destined to meet a person who would turn their lives upside down. On May 16, 1980, the day began normally for 8-year-old Elizabeth and her mother, Mary. They arrived and parked near a hair salon on Cleveland Avenue. When they left the salon, they headed to their car. Mary immediately noticed a young man, who looked to be about 30, confidently approaching them from the direction of a busy intersection. He looked at them strangely, and Mary instinctively felt uncomfortable under his gaze, but she did not panic since they were in a busy area. This young man did not look particularly dangerous. He stood out because of his thick glasses. Mary assumed he was merely asking for directions or something similar. However, when he approached the car, he took a gun from his belt, placed it next to the hood, and demanded a ride. In horror, Mary was ready to give up the keys to the car that the church had given them if only he would let them go. But the criminal did not want the keys. He forced Mary and her daughter to sit in the front, demanded that she drive north. Mary tried to influence the attacker, calm him down, and persuade him to let them go. She convinced him that if there were any problems, he could turn to the church, which would not abandon its parishioners in trouble. Mary stoically remained calm, trying to soothe the kidnapper and even bribing him. However, all her efforts were in vain. She even turned to the Bible, but the kidnapper was clearly not ready to listen to the Holy Scriptures. He ordered them to be quiet and keep driving. When they stopped at the nearest intersection, a patrolman pulled up next to their car. The kidnapper threatened to kill Elizabeth if they went in the same direction as the policeman or gave him a signal. Mary was forced to change their route, and the kidnapper noticeably relaxed. They drove to a wooded area in Anoka, stopping at a deserted camping site. There, the attacker ordered them out of the car and deeper into the vegetation, cautiously looking around. He forced them into the trunk, tied the mother and daughter together, taped their mouths shut. He then got behind the wheel and drove into the countryside. There, he planned to pick up a spare tire for his van, placing it in a trunk right on top of the captives. At that moment, 2 neighborhood boys became curious about what was happening and came dangerously close. One stood in front of the car while the other, named Jason Wilkman, approached the trunk from behind. The little boy curiously looked at the wheel and seemed to notice something underneath it. The kidnappers saw Jason and panicked. Without thinking twice, he grabbed Jason and threw him into the trunk with the others. When Jason's friends saw what had happened, he immediately ran home to tell his family. The kidnapper chased after him but was too far behind to catch up. In a panic, he jumped behind the wheel and took off. Jason was crying, and Mary tried to talk to him, but he was too scared, could only tell her his name and age. She tried to calm the children down, and it worked. At least they stopped crying. The trip was short, but Mary heard them moving around in the rough terrain. Branches and bushes constantly hit the vehicle as the criminal drove deep into the forest for several kilometers. Here, he pulled Jason out of the trunk and took him away. A few minutes later, he returned alone, did not open the trunk, but simply got behind the wheel and drove away. Mary prayed that he would just let the innocent child go because she did not hear any shots, but gloomy thoughts crept into her mind. Mary's car was left in the bushes, It was hard to see because he was increasing the distance from the police. The kidnapper got into a black van without windows, along with Mary and her daughter. Before driving off, he double-checked the ropes on his captives, then returned to the city and took them to his electronics store, where he allowed them to use the toilet and gave them juice to drink. They stretched their limbs, which had gone numb. Mary tried to find out what he wanted, but instead of answering, he taped both their mouths shut again, tied them up, put them back in the van, and drove them to his family's house in a neighboring town. The small house was only 10 kilometers from the apartment where the Stauffer lived with their children. Nevertheless, Mary and daughter did not know where they were. They were mistaken while he wandered through many places. The criminal took both of them to the bedroom of the house, which was small, dark, and cramped. He removed the door handle and locked the door. Getting used to the darkness and looking around, Mary and her daughter realized they were in a kind of storage room filled with clothes, toys, but there was nothing that could help them. At the same time, Mary's husband, Irv, and her son, Steve, were waiting for the return of the mother and daughter from the beauty salon. They had a family dinner planned, and the last preparations were to be made before leaving. Both should have returned long ago, which began to worry the household. At 4:30 p.m., Irv called the salon, and the hairdresser confirmed that the visitors had left long ago but had no idea where they were going or what could have happened. Irv called his wife's friends, but they did not know where she might be. Then he turned to other members of the Baptist community and involved them in the search. They all called local hospitals, acquaintances, police stations, and even morgues to find the missing. When no information could be obtained, Irv contacted the police. However, from the very beginning, it was obvious that they suspected of himself of the disappearance of his wife. By that night, the authorities were already engaged in the search for a 6-year-old boy, Jason Wilkman. The search for Mary continued. Irv explained that he was not involved in the disappearance of his wife and daughter. He and his son were waiting for them at home and had no idea what happened after they left the hairdresser. But the authorities did not believe him and suspected he had done something to them. The next morning, a car was found. They even managed to find 2 sets of fingerprints on the steering wheel, but their owners were not in the police database. The car had no license plate, so investigators could not determine whose car it was. The area around the car began to be thoroughly searched. First of all, they found the car's license plate. It had been torn off when the criminal escaped through the bushes. Suspicions arose that Jason's abduction and the disappearance of Mary and her child could be connected. This helped them know that the car belonged to Mary. It seemed that everything was very serious, and the missing persons were in danger. About 300 police officers and volunteers were gathered to begin the search operation. Announcements were published featuring images of the missing. Based on the words of the boy's friend, a composite sketch of the kidnapper was created. From that moment on, the authorities' suspicions regarding Mary's husband only intensified. Ironically, the composite sketch bore a striking resemblance to him. Both he and the kidnapper were dark-haired, wore glasses. Irv became the main suspect in the disappearance of the 2 children and Mary. However, Irv provided an alibi supported by a photo and passed a lie detector test. His fingerprints did not match those found in the car, yet the authorities still did not want to clear him as a suspect. Irv continued to emphasize his innocence and pointed out that the investigation's misconceptions were leading them away from the real goals of the search operation. Before her first trip to the Philippines, Mary had taught at the school, and among her 9th grade students was Ming Sun Shiu, a teenager of Taiwanese American descent, with whom Mary had a good relationship. He showed great promise in sports and also had significant academic success. It seemed that the teenager had a great future ahead of him. Later, former students of Mary said that Ming was enamored with his math teacher. He thought she seemed smart and stately. After Mary went to the Philippines, she returned and moved to another city. Ming became truly obsessed with his teacher and constantly remembered her. He began to pursue his secret love, and it looked radical. Confusing the younger of Stauffer with his father, also named Irv, Ming showed up at Mary's in-laws house in Duluth on the 4th of July and held Irv Sr. at gunpoint. Ming took him into the house and told him to call his wife to the room. When Mary's mother-in-law entered, Ming realized his mistake. Ming claimed he was simply mistaken and threatened that if they went to the police, he would return and shoot them both, and then he ran away. The elderly couple had no idea that Ming was really interested in the younger Irv. They never reported it anywhere and didn't even tell the mayor and his son about the incident until they returned from the Philippines in 1979. No one had any idea who could have attacked the families, neither the motive nor the goals were known. Mary only found out that the attack was carried out by Ming when he had already taken her and her daughter prisoner. He proudly told her about it before attacking her. Mary had no idea that he had been spying on the family from the forest, which was located not far from the house where they settled. Probably, he decided to attack because he saw preparations for departure and understood that soon they could leave again for a long time. Shortly before the kidnapping, Ming even tried to get through the doors of the patio, but nothing came of it. Later, he attempted to get through the storage room and drilled several holes. Burr found sawdust and removed it, but he still did not understand the relevance of their appearance. Now everything fell into place. In the meantime, the captives experienced the hospitality of the criminal. Immediately after the kidnapping, Ming admitted that Mary was lucky that her family was not nearby during the surprise attack, as he was ready to do anything to take her, even kill everyone. The next day after the kidnapping, he pulled Mary out of the closet, spread a blanket on the floor in the living room, tied her up. After that, he made a 3-hour video interview in which he revealed his identity. Mary remembered Ming when he spoke about math lessons at school. He reminded her that he was the student she had failed in exams. Mary immediately recalled who he was but could not understand what he meant. He told her that he couldn't get an academic scholarship because of her, as his parents had died, and he couldn't afford to go to college because of that. After losing his place in school, he was drafted into the Vietnam War, which led him to a prison camp where he experienced some tough times. He blamed Mary for all of this. Now, he wanted to make her pay. There was one flaw in this tragic story: Ming had made it all up. Mary remembered perfectly well that he graduated from high school with excellent marks, so he could easily have received a scholarship to any college. In reality, he attended the University of Minnesota and graduated from there. He never served in the army and instead immediately opened his own store. Mary realized that his story was a lie designed to impose a sense of guilt and manipulate her. In fact, Ming lived in a fictional world. He wrote fantasy stories about many women whom he abused, and after that, they begged him to be with them. Among these fantasies was his 9th grade math teacher. During a video interview, he revealed his intent not to cause physical pain but to inflict emotional trauma so that she would feel dirty, humiliated, and insulted. The footage included more than 6 hours of assaults. Over the next few days, a friend of Ming returned a borrowed camera but kept the tape of the torture. He abused Mary daily. Ming claimed he was not a pedophile. He never abused Elizabeth, nor did he force her to watch the torture of her mother, although he repeatedly threatened to do so. Unfortunately, this did not mean that Beth would remain on the sidelines of his villainous fantasies. Elizabeth turned out to be a pawn in his fictional stories. Ming demanded that Mary show love, but she refused because she was a believer and a devoted wife who had promised to love only her husband. To force she to submit, he threatened to place her daughter in a thick plastic bag and tie it shut, claiming that it would take 4 to 5 minutes for Beth to inhale all the oxygen, after which she would die. He also threatened to kill all the members of her family one by one until Mary obeyed. Mary was forced to meet him halfway. She kissed him on the cheek, feigning love, but this was not enough. Only a kiss on the lips calmed him down. Then he removed the bag from her daughter's head. Later, during a similar incident, he left Elizabeth in his van for 4 hours. This happened on a hot summer day, and in the scorching sun, the girl miraculously did not die. This experience finally convinced Mary of the need to obey him, otherwise, they would be in trouble. In the meantime, their family continued to hope that they would see both Mary and Elizabeth alive. Weeks went by, and according to statistics, the probability of the missing returning after such a long period was practically zero. After 2 weeks, the police called Irv and reported that they had found a woman's body in the forest, which was presumed to be Mary's. He provided his wife's dental records and was relieved to learn that it was not her, and therefore, there was still hope for the safe return of both his wife and daughter. Meanwhile, life in captivity continued. After some time, Ming softened the strict rules of the internal regulations. He allowed his captive to eat in the kitchen, take a shower on the 10th day, even gave Elizabeth several board games and a TV. He began to affectionately call her Betty. Despite the circumstances, this looked very unpleasant. During this period, Ming forced Mary to write 2 letters to her husband. In the first letter, she was to convince the police that she had not disappeared but had simply run away from her hated husband, whom she no longer loved. In the second letter, he voiced demands that the police stop their interference, or else no one would ever see either of them again. Ming still led a double life. He was involved in business management and worked in his electronics store as if nothing had happened. From the outside, it seemed that he was quite decent and that his life was completely ordinary. In reality, he was a kidnapper and a murderer. After 3 weeks, Ming took a rented mobile home and went with his victims to the fair in Chicago. Before that, they stopped at a shopping center in Madison, Wisconsin, to change clothes, as they had been wearing their old clothes since the abduction. Both victims were under close watch from him. He would not allow them to escape. He kept one of the 2 by his side, and in case of escape, he promised to kill the other. This was how he was able to grant them some relative freedom of movement, albeit within reasonable limits. Despite all of Mary's efforts to warn the police by using a receipt from her bag while shopping, the bank was notified and, unfortunately, the FBI never received the information. It apparently got lost. When Elizabeth was left unattended for a while in a shopping mall, she attempted to tell a group of teenagers that something had been stolen, but they just laughed and walked away, not believing her story. By the end of this little trip, all 3 even stopped by the University of Minnesota campus to watch fireworks. During this time, at least 3 police cars drove past them. However, Mary knew that the criminal had a gun with him, and she feared that he might harm them without thinking twice if she called for help. So she remained silent, despite her hopes. On July 7, 1980, Mary and Elizabeth faced serious difficulties. Ming realized that he could not remain in his house forever without being noticed. Therefore, he decided to buy a mobile home for the 3 of them, making it clear that he intended to continue this madness and wanted to eliminate any possibility of being caught. Mary understood that there might not be any other chances to escape, so she planned to wait for him to leave for work before trying to free herself. The next morning, Ming went to work as usual, and Mary began her fight for freedom. She managed to muster enough strength to remove the heavy door from its hinges, from which the captive's shackles were attached. Until that moment, they had been unable to do this. Suddenly, she heard some noise and feared that Ming had returned. Mary was instantly frightened. She acted quickly and returned everything to its original state, as if they were still tied up. They seemed to sit and listen forever until finally, they calmed down, realizing that Ming was gone. The nervous tension played a cruel joke on them, but the situation did not improve because precious time had been lost. Mary had no idea when their tormentor would return. She got to the phone and called the county sheriff's office. She was put on hold twice before finally contacting the detective who was leading the search for the 3 missing people. Thanks to a tag from a dry cleaner, she provided the address where she and her daughter live. Mary was most shocked by the policeman's question about whether Jason was with them. It was then that she realized that the child had never returned home and was probably killed in that forest during a stop. In fear of Ming's return, they simply hid in the storage room, afraid that their tormentor would soon come back. Fortunately, the police arrived before long, and the mother and daughter were freed. Both victims were photographed, having remained shackled with bicycle cables for almost 2 months. FBI agents went to Ming's shop, searches were conducted, and the criminal was arrested without resistance. A few days later, Mary went north to visit her family. Her happy release from captivity, along with her daughter, became a real sensation. However, in reality, their misadventures were not over yet. Just a few days after being incarcerated, Ming hired a killer. It turned out to be a cellmate, Richard Green, who was about to be released from prison. He asked Green to commit the murder of Mary and Elizabeth so that they could not testify against him. Additionally, Green was supposed to help Ming escape from prison in exchange for a promise of $50,000 once the job was done. As an advance, he handed over a check for $1,000. Fortunately, this plot failed, and the criminal was caught. Richard did not admit that he was hired. This was only discovered during a second interrogation and after checking the financial transactions. The prosecutor's office had more than enough evidence to build a strong case. The jury ultimately viewed a 3-hour interview that fully revealed Ming's insidious plan. The hearing was a tense moment for all involved. The mayor had to walk between the prosecution and defense tables. As soon as she asked Mary the first question, Ming jumped up and attacked the mayor. However, the prosecutor blocked his path. The guards knocked him down and immobilized him. The hearing lasted 10 days, after which Ming was found guilty of kidnapping. Difficulties arose even before the hearing began. He confessed to one of the psychiatrists who worked with him that he knew where the body of Jason Wilkman. He was then offered a plea bargain. The authorities agreed to reduce the charge to second-degree murder. In late October, Ming led the police to the boy's body. Jason had died from blunt force trauma to the head, inflicted from behind. Ultimately, Ming Sin Shiu was sentenced to life in prison but retained the possibility of parole after 30 years. Mary then had to testify again as a material witness in the trial for Jason's murder. It seemed that this terrible story was about to end. However, this time Ming was prepared for the meeting. He secretly brought a knife into the courtroom. During cross-examination, when Mary was answering questions, he jumped up from his chair, grabbed her by the neck from behind, and took her hostage, holding the blade near her throat. Fortunately, there was a policeman behind who managed to snatch the knife away and prevent the murder. As a result, Mary suffered a cut that went through her chin and the corner of her mouth, requiring 62 stitches. The second trial was postponed. As part of a plea bargain, Ming confessed to the kidnapping and second-degree murder of Jason, after which he was sentenced to 40 years in prison, with the terms of the sentences to be served concurrently. The case of this dangerous criminal was again in the spotlight. In 2010, the judge ruled that, in the case of parole, Ming Sen would be sent to undergo a state program for individuals who have committed violent abuse crimes. According to the judge, Ming met the criteria for criminals who require life imprisonment. After many hours of evaluating psychiatric reports, it was decided that he posed a permanent threat to society. For Mary, this decision came as a great relief, as Ming had openly declared to Beth, and then the entire family, that if he were ever released, he would come for them. Curiously, Ming's business was estimated by experts to be worth about $250,000. The Stauffer family filed a civil suit against him as compensation for illegal restriction of freedom and emotional distress. However, upon hearing about this, Mary declared that the right to seek justice belonged only to the Lord God, and she refused to pursue the case. After all these events, Mary repeatedly stated that despite all the evil this man caused, she continues to pray for him. Ming Sin Shiu is currently being held at the medium-security federal prison in Marion, Illinois. The ordeal of Mary Stauffer and her daughter Elizabeth stands as a chilling testament to the depths of obsession and the fragility of ordinary life. Yet, through nearly 2 months of unimaginable torment, Mary's unwavering faith and courage not only secured their escape but also illuminated a path of resilience for her family. The tragic death of Jason Wilkman and the scars left on the Stauffers underscore the devastating ripple effects of one individual's malice. Decades later, with Ming confined and deemed a perpetual danger, Mary's choice to forgive and pray for her captor reflects a profound strength that transcends vengeance. Her story endures as both a sobering warning of unchecked obsession and an inspiring reminder that even in the face of profound evil, hope, faith, and the human spirit can prevail. Perry March was born in 1961 to Arthur March and Sephora. He and his wife, Janet, were complete opposites of each other. He is ordinary, but his wife was a very bright, beautiful woman, dreamy and talented. Janet grew up in a wealthy family, as the daughter of a well-known lawyer from Nashville. Janet and Perry met as students at the University of Michigan in the early 1980s and quickly became inseparable. When Perry graduated and moved to Chicago to work as a financial broker, Janet followed him without hesitation. However, she soon began to miss her home and family. To support Perry's education, her father agreed to pay for his expensive tuition at the prestigious Vanderbilt Law School. As a result, Janet and Perry returned to Nashville, and since Perry was hesitant, it was Janet who proposed to him in Percy Warner Park. They got married in 1987 and moved into a house in a well-known area of the city, which was rented and paid for by Janet's father. The following year, Perry graduated and chose to work for a local law firm in Nashville instead of accepting offers from large firms in New York. In 1990, Janet gave birth to a son named Samson, affectionately called Sammy. On the surface, this family seemed to have everything: a mother, a father, and a son. Unfortunately, this outward appearance of happiness was deceptive. In 1991, a scandal emerged at the law firm where Perry worked after a young female specialist received an inappropriate proposal from a colleague. A stranger sent her a letter expressing his attraction to her and his desire for an intimate relationship. Feeling embarrassed, the young woman reported the incident to her boss. After this, 2 more letters arrived, urging her to respond to the proposal by leaving a message in the firm's library. In response, the firm took measures to identify the sender of these inappropriate letters. They installed a CCTV camera in the library where she was supposed to leave her reply. When the man came to collect the letter, the firm's lawyers were shocked to discover that he was Perry March, the husband of Janet. Faced with evidence from the video, Perry refused to confess. The law firm gave him an ultimatum: resign or be fired. He chose to resign. This uncomfortable situation led to legal consequences, as the female employee who received the unwanted proposal sued Perry for financial compensation. He was ordered to pay her. To avoid a harassment claim, she requested $25,000, half of which Perry was to pay in monthly installments, while the remaining $12,500 was to be paid in a lump sum. This arrangement was made to keep his wife, Janet, from discovering the scandal. In 1994, Janet and Perry welcomed their second child, a lovely daughter named Sephora. As their family grew, they decided to build a larger home and purchased nearly 2 acres in the affluent suburb of Forest Hill. Over the next year, they worked on constructing their dream house, a $650,000 mansion designed in the French country style. Janet was very enthusiastic about the project and closely oversaw every stage of the construction. However, her demands were sometimes unreasonable, leading Perry to step in and help mediate between her and the construction team. Although the new house brought excitement, Janet and Perry's marriage was facing difficulties. Their relationship had been strained for several months, and they frequently attended therapy, both together and individually. At home, they rarely communicated. Perry was often away for at least 3 days a week, and their arguments escalated whenever he returned. A family therapist suggested they take a break from each other, but Janet was adamant about getting a divorce. In August 1996, a significant incident occurred that changed the course of Janet and Perry's relationship forever. Perry needed to pay the final installment to a woman at a law firm, but, due to financial issues, he sent her a letter requesting to postpone the payment until October. Unfortunately, Janet read the letter, which led to a heated argument between them. In the aftermath, Janet contacted her mother to arrange a meeting with a divorce lawyer. On August 15, 1996, Janet was scheduled to meet with the lawyer but never arrived at the office because she mysteriously disappeared that night. Perry claimed that Janet left voluntarily after their argument. He told the police that she expressed a desire to get some space to think but did not specify where she was going. He said that at around 8:30 p.m., Janet packed a suitcase, took her passport and $1,500 in cash, and left in her car. He also mentioned that she left him a list of tasks to complete before her return. After she left, he informed friends and family of her departure as he normally would. The next morning, Deneen Beard, the maid, came to clean the house and was surprised to find everything in order. However, Perry asked her to focus on her work and not to go into the children's room. Then a nanny named Ella Goldschmidt, who had previously arranged with Janet that her son would play with Sammy, arrived. After Deneen left, Ella noticed Sammy jumping on an oriental rug that was rolled up on the floor next to the playroom. When she returned around 2 p.m. to pick up her son, the rug was no longer there. Initially, Janet's family believed Perry's explanation. Janet's father went to Nashville International Airport to check if Janet had left her car there. Janet's mother, Carolyn, became increasingly worried, as her daughter would not just vanish without a word and would never abandon her children. Although Carolyn wanted to contact the police, Perry convinced her to wait 12 days, claiming that Janet had said she would return by then. That evening, Perry called his father, Arthur, a retired U.S. Army lieutenant colonel living in Jalisco, Mexico. Arthur readily agreed to travel to Nashville to support his son during this challenging time. In the meantime, Janet's family's concerns continued to escalate. With August 25th being Sammy's 6th birthday, fears grew that something had happened to Janet. She would definitely not miss such an important occasion. While Perry and Janet's parents told the party guests she had traveled to California to visit her brother and was postponing her return due to an ear infection, her sudden disappearance raised alarm among her loved ones. Days passed without any news from Janet, and the anxious waiting could not go on much longer. On August 29th, Janet's parents reported her missing to the police. Detective David Miller, a skilled investigator with extensive experience, was assigned to the case. He initiated the investigation by reaching out to hospitals and reviewing Janet's bank and credit card accounts, which had not been used since her disappearance, raising concerns about her well-being. On September 7th, authorities located Janet's car in a parking lot at an apartment complex about 5 miles from her home. The car appeared to have been parked there for several weeks. Inside, police discovered Janet's bag, which contained her documents, passport, credit cards, and $11 in cash. They also found a suitcase filled with clothes, notably absent of a bra, toothpaste, a comb, or underwear, which seemed unusual. Additional evidence included a pair of white sandals in the glove compartment and unusual, dirty bicycle tire tracks near the car. Investigators needed to analyze this evidence carefully. On September 10, 1996, Perry was questioned by investigators and consented to a search of his home. The police conducted the search over the weekend of September 14th to 15th while Perry was away in Chicago with his children. The house showed no signs of domestic violence or anything noteworthy. A few days later, the owner of a tire store contacted law enforcement to inform them that Perry had visited the store on August 21st, a week after Janet went missing. Perry inquired about purchasing a new set of tires, despite the good condition of those already on his car. When asked why he wanted a different brand, his response raised further suspicions. On September 18th, Perry decided to move to Chicago with his children. Before leaving, he had a concerning conversation with Janet's longtime friend, Diane Sachs, which she later reported to the police. Perry asked Diane if she thought he could kill his wife. Although she hesitated to answer, he proceeded to ask the disturbing question of what she would think if he had loaded Janet's body into his car and taken it to a remote location for disposal. This raised serious suspicions about him. As a result, the police launched a comprehensive search for Janet, involving divers, 2 helicopters with thermal scanners, specially trained dogs, police officers, and volunteers. Meanwhile, Perry hired a lawyer, who informed the police that Perry would not cooperate with the investigation. In November, as Janet's parents held a day of mourning for her, Perry chose not to attend, further increasing the police's suspicions about him. Over time, a theory about Janet's disappearance began to develop. It was suggested that Perry and Janet had a heated argument the night she disappeared. During this argument, Janet may have said something that provoked Perry, leading him to strike her hard. Given that Perry held a black belt in martial arts, a single blow could have killed her, or he might have strangled her. Whether intentional or not, when he found Janet dead at his feet, he was faced with a dire decision. Investigators believe that Perry hid Janet's body either in the basement, in the woods, or near their home. Furthermore, Ella had mentioned that there was a rolled-up rug that she had noticed in Perry's house that morning. Janet's body may have been inside that carpet, and tragically, little Sammy may have unknowingly played around his mother's body. Afterward, Perry moved her body to his Jeep and drove to a location where he buried it. He then drove Janet's car to where it was later discovered, taking her mountain bike with him so he could ride it back home. However, these are merely speculations, and the police were tasked with uncovering evidence of the murder, marking a new phase in the investigation. Janet's father, a prominent lawyer, was determined to uncover the truth about his daughter's disappearance. Meanwhile, Perry applied to become the manager of Janet's estate, but her parents opposed this and filed their own petition. Perry refused to consent. Ultimately, the court designated a guardian to oversee Janet's property and ordered Perry to return some items he had taken. He only returned them after being urged to do so. This was just the beginning of a legal dispute between Perry and Janet's parents. The battle continued until late 1999 when the court granted Janet's parents the right to visit their grandchildren. They traveled to Perry's new home in Illinois, eager to see the children, but were shocked to discover that he had moved to Mexico to be with his father. Moreover, just weeks after relocating, Perry married a local woman named Carmen Rojas. 3 years had passed since Janet went missing, and she still had not been officially declared dead. This prompted her parents to file a lawsuit against Perry for the manslaughter of their daughter. When Perry did not appear in court to contest the charges against him, the judge ordered him to pay $113.5 million in compensation to Janet's parents in May 2000. Janet's parents traveled back to Mexico to confront Perry and requested to meet his children. He firmly refused their request, prompting them to return to Nashville. A month later, they returned to Mexico with a court order and assistance from local police, who arrested Perry for violating his visa. Although the charges were eventually dropped, by the time Perry got back home, his children were missing. Taking advantage of Perry's absence, Janet's parents took the children to the U.S. and sought permanent custody once they were home. This led to a direct confrontation and sparked another legal battle for custody. Ultimately, Perry regained custody, and Janet's parents were reprimanded for unlawfully taking the children. Later, the Tennessee Court of Appeals overturned Perry's manslaughter conviction. At this point, Perry believed he could lead a stable life in Mexico with his new wife and children, feeling confident that nothing would disrupt his plans. However, unexpected developments were on the horizon, as the local police department, along with 2 investigators, continued to actively investigate Janet's case. In the latter half of 2004, the prosecutor's office introduced new evidence that led to a retrial, during which 59 witnesses were heard. This resulted in charges against Perry for second-degree murder, tampering with evidence, and abuse of a corpse. In October 2005, an arrest warrant and a request for extradition to the United States were issued for Perry. While being transported, Perry was accompanied by Pat Postiglione, one of the detectives involved in the investigation. During the journey, Perry was quite talkative and asked the detective whether he could face murder charges if an accident occurred. He also told Pat that he would be willing to confess everything if he could receive a sentence of no more than 7 years. The detective stated that he would pass this information on to the district attorney. Janet's parents were determined not to allow Perry to enjoy a new life after spending a short time in prison. They submitted a new petition for custody of the children, which the judge approved. Facing difficulties in the legal system, Perry sought another solution. He attempted to persuade his cellmate, Russell Ferris, to kill Janet's parents. Russell became interested in the plan and learned that Perry's father, Arthur, would act as the intermediary. After 2 months of discussions among the three, Russell's lawyer notified the police about Perry's offer to kill Janet's parents. From that point on, Perry's situation became increasingly complicated. Initially, the evidence against Perry for murder was weak and mostly circumstantial. His lawyer argued that there was no solid proof that Perry had committed the crime. If he had been found not guilty, he could not be tried again for the same offense. However, the situation changed dramatically with the discovery of a murder-for-hire plot involving Janet's parents. Now, the police had recorded conversations revealing details of the planned murder, including statements made by both Perry and his father, Arthur. When Arthur listened to the recordings, he realized his errors and agreed to testify against his son in exchange for a more lenient sentence. The disturbing truth emerged: Arthur, Perry's father, revealed that his son had confessed to him about killing Janet. A few weeks after the murder, Perry sought his father's help because he was anxious about the body being discovered. He asked Arthur to help hide it. One night, they drove to a location where, according to Arthur, the body was already decomposing and stored in a bag. Arthur recounted loading the remains into Perry's Jeep. They then traveled north to Bowling Green, Kentucky, where they stayed at a motel. Under the cover of darkness, Arthur attempted to dispose of the body. He looked for a body of water deep enough to conceal the remains but was unable to find one before sunrise. Eventually, he located a suitable spot. Arthur later attempted to guide investigators to the location where he had hidden the body, but he couldn't specify the exact spot. However, both the police and the jury believed his account of the incident. According to Arthur, after Perry killed Janet, her body remained in their home for some time, wrapped in a rug. Unfortunately for Arthur, his confession did not yield the leniency he had hoped for, and he died just months later while incarcerated. Perry faced a much harsher fate. He was convicted of second-degree murder, tampering with evidence, abuse of a corpse, theft, and conspiracy to commit murder, resulting in a 56-year prison sentence. He is currently incarcerated at the Morgan County Correctional Complex, where he assists fellow inmates with their legal appeals in the prison law library. He will be eligible for parole in 2038. Tragically, Janet's remains have never been found.